This deadly forest is about to become my personal stronghold. But right now, I'm still trying to figure out how I suddenly ended up in another world. I push myself up from the damp dirt and steady myself. I scan the towering trees around me. Most are thicker than I am and look well over a century old. That was when it hit me. I was stranded deep in a primeval forest. And judging by how untouched everything looked, I had to be somewhere deep in the wilderness. My face instantly twists into pure misery. I was an out-of-shape city kid with absolutely zero wilderness survival skills. System? Hello? Come on, the setup is perfect. Give me something here. Only the rustling wind and distant wolf howls answer me. I swallow hard and wipe the cold sweat from my palms. Genuinely terrified I won't survive the night. I check the foliage to figure out which way is south and plan a route. I hype myself up until I'm actually convinced I could take down a wolf with one sliding tackle. I crash straight into an invisible barrier and drop onto the dirt. What on earth is this air wall doing here? I feel along the invisible perimeter and realize I'm trapped inside a 1 square meter space. Instead of panicking, I grin. Anything this strange has to mean there's something special about me. I look down and stare in disbelief at the custom ancient-style Minecraft skin I'd equipped earlier. I squat down and punch the ground twice until the dirt block cracks apart. The small cube spins in the air and flies straight into my body. A tiny rotating cube icon appears beside translucent red hearts and a hunger meter in my vision. Humans have limits, but I'm done being human. Steve is totally invincible. I get the itch to chop some wood, only to realize the nearest tree is 3 meters away. Desperate to get out, I walk straight through the barrier and find myself standing outside. The air wall behind me starts violently shaking and shrinking, threatening to collapse the space. I rush back inside. The barrier stabilizes, and my health quickly returns to normal. I weigh my choices and decide the early confinement is worth it for a space that can keep growing without limit. I dig up every dirt block in my 1 square meter grid until solid stone finally appears underneath. Reality turned out to be much less forgiving than any game. The dirt layer was so thick that I had to dig down 6 or 7 meters just to clear the block. Outside the pit, the displaced dirt blocks defied gravity in midair, though they would reset back to normal after 4 hours. I stacked dirt blocks beneath my feet to elevate myself, hoping to scout for a nearby river from higher ground. Immortal cultivation, body refinement, or faith felt completely out of place for Minecraft. Could experience points be the answer? In vanilla Minecraft, experience was mainly used for enchanting. It came from fighting mobs, breeding animals, trading with villagers, mining, and fishing. I built myself a vertical pillar of dirt blocks to ride right back up to the surface. Suddenly, rustling sounds echoed from the nearby bushes. A scrawny, dust-covered gray wolf crawled out from the foliage, looking completely wretched compared to any zoo animal. Its sharp teeth were caked with meat scraps and brownish residue, and a foul, choking stench of blood washed over me. Instead of lunging straight at me, the gray wolf crouched down and began pacing in slow, deliberate circles. That abnormal behavior instantly put me on high alert. I quickly threw down blocks to shield my left, right, top, and back, leaving only a narrow opening in front. A lone outcast wolf was definitely not what I was dealing with here. Noise suddenly erupted from all directions as the surrounding bushes began to rustle. A whole pack of wolves had quietly surrounded me. 6 starving wolves locked their eyes on me in a tight encirclement. Even knowing I could respawn, my modern instincts made my heart race with genuine fear. I could have easily sealed myself underground where I wouldn't need to breathe and my scent would vanish. But opportunities to gain experience were far too rare to waste. After a brief hesitation, I built a double-thick back wall and braced myself to fight. I checked my status HUD and saw my health had fully regenerated, with only a single hunger bar depleted. Natural health regeneration is on my side, so how do you expect to win? I figured the wolves would provide all the meat I needed to refill my hunger meter. I rolled up my sleeves and dragged a sharp stone piece straight across my palm. It confirmed that pain and bleeding were completely gone in this world. Colorful pixel particles dissolved into thin air from the scratch. It was a shame my bloodless trick failed to provoke the wolves. One impatient gray wolf finally snapped and lunged straight toward my opening. I shoved my left hand directly into its open jaws without hesitating. The wolf clamped down and tugged furiously at my arm. The pulling force was so weak I barely felt any strain at all. My health bar dropped by half a heart and then froze completely in place. I looked down at the struggling beast with a sense of utter pity. I decided to keep this one alive as bait instead of finishing it off right away. More gray wolves took the bait and surged forward out of the dark trees to attack. A wolf lunged straight at my right hand. I didn't flinch, lifting my left hand with might of the untamed to crush its throat before tossing the carcass behind my back. The next wolf threw itself right into my arms. I grabbed it with settler's grasp for a quick double kill, though my grip strength accidentally caused the body to burst into pieces. With a heavy haymaker punch, I scored a triple kill and threw the third wolf away. I braced myself for the next attack, only to freeze in utter bewilderment. Before I could move, a whistling arrow pierced the gray wolf's ear and dropped it dead. Somebody was actually trying to steal my kill. Glowing experience points streamed straight from the fallen wolf into my body, making me let out a long sigh of relief. The two remaining wolves whimpered and fled with their tails tucked between their legs. I knocked away the dirt block beneath my feet to drop the wolf carcasses into the hidden cavity, then patched the ground right back up. I checked my floating status bar and saw I had reached level 2. Stepping forward to test the boundary, my activity range expanded to a full 3x3 grid. I broke my train of thought as a rugged, bearded hunter and an excited young boy pushed through the bushes from the direction of the arrow. The boy pointed excitedly at the dead wolf and exclaimed, "Dad, that was amazing! When will I ever be able to shoot like that?" His father crossed his arms and told him, "You'll need to practice your basics for years. Brat, you have a lot more to learn." I stepped forward with a deep bow and cupped fists to play my part. "Thank you for saving my life, hero. If not for your arrow, those wolves would have eaten me alive," I said with an entirely earnest expression. The hunter swallowed hard as he looked closer at my refined appearance and expensive clothing, instantly suspecting I was some wealthy young master out looking for entertainment. The hunter lowered his head and asked, "Excuse me, young master, do you still want this wolf?" I waved him off, insisting it belonged to him since he saved my life, and he rubbed his hands together with a delighted grin. He quietly figured the meat could feed his children, and the valuable pelt would finally pay for his sick wife's medicine. His sharp hunter instincts kicked in as he noticed fresh bloodstains splashed across the dirt blocks where I had been hiding, realizing the blood didn't match the arrow kill at all. Recalling local ghost stories about mountain spirits and eerie willow fires, the hunter turned back to see me chatting cheerfully with his son and grew deeply suspicious, overhearing me casually ask about the current year, dynasty, and region. The terrified hunter broke out in a cold sweat and muttered to himself that he had run into a monster. Liu then chimed in, saying, "Big brother, bye. It's getting late. Why don't you stay at our house tonight?" Panicked out of his mind, the hunter grabbed his son in a cold sweat and hissed, "We're leaving right now." Liu looked back with a puzzled apology as his father frantically dragged him away. The hunter wore a gloomy expression as he dragged Liu away along the forest path. I called out to them to wait. Liu stopped and nervously asked, "Young master, what is it?" I put on an act of physical strain as I lifted the heavy wolf carcass and dropped it into Liu's bamboo basket. The sudden weight almost knocked the poor kid over. His father stared at the blood on the wolf pelt and then glanced at my clean hands in absolute terror. I immediately regretted my poor acting since I had lifted the wolf far too easily. I quickly made up an excuse and told Liu that my strength came from eating spinach. He asked where he could buy some, so I jokingly told him he would have to fight Popeye for it. The hunter stepped in and took the heavy burden onto his own back. He stumbled slightly under the weight, but held on for his family's sake. He dragged Liu away in a frantic rush, fleeing into the woods as if evil spirits were chasing them. I was stuck in Shaanxi during the late Ming Dynasty, and I had buried the wolf corpses earlier to avoid raising suspicion when I eventually visited their village. Pretending to be some mysterious hermit sounded way too exhausting for my lazy personality. I turned back to focus on expanding my limited territory instead. They ran frantically until they were close to the village. Liu begged his father to slow down because his legs were giving out. His father did not say a word and simply broke into a full sprint until they reached safety. Liu asked why they had to run so fast. His breathless father gasped that I was not human. He claimed the village's strong life energy would keep me out, but he still planned to warn the village chief to keep everyone away from my area. I set to work on the first law of Minecraft. I punched a nearby tree until white, spiderweb cracks splintered across the bark. The trunk finally shattered and burst into glowing fragments. I used the wood to craft a crafting table and my very first wooden pickaxe. After that, I cleared away the surrounding dirt blocks by hand to get a better view of the ground underneath. I punched one of the wolf carcasses to break it down. The massive beast shattered like a block, but it only dropped 2 pieces of meat and 2 pieces of leather. The system was seriously ripping me off with these terrible drop rates. I crafted a stone pickaxe but hesitated to make a stone axe because my wood supply was so low. Saving the remaining logs was my top priority, so I used my nearly broken wooden pickaxe as fuel in the furnace instead. A single log cooked down into charcoal, and I planted an oak sapling near my feet to keep my forestry sustainable. I combined the charcoal to craft a torch, officially obtaining a physics-defying, nuclear-powered light source. The flame felt warm to the touch but didn't burn my hand. I even pressed it directly against the grass, and nothing caught fire. I crafted a few extra stone pickaxes to keep in my inventory for backup and broke my crafting table to carry it with me. Night had completely fallen outside, but this was Minecraft, and who sleeps on the very first day? It was time to go mining. I didn't even need a sword yet since a pickaxe could smash through enemies just fine, saving my wooden sticks. Everything was ready, but my stone pickaxe snapped cleanly in half with a sharp crack and vanished into thin air. That already made 4 pickaxes broken into dust while my inventory filled up with 2 or 3 stacks of stone, yet I still hadn't found a single speck of coal. To maximize my search, I used the cross-mining method, digging 2 blocks in every direction within my 9-block space while keeping a 2-block height difference between planes, refusing to waste more materials building a staircase all the way back up. I stubbornly vowed to stop only after finding at least 1 piece of coal. After another pickaxe shattered and I switched to a fresh one, I finally spotted coal embedded in the stone. Thank goodness, it's an actual vein. Even a tiny one is enough for me to level up, maybe even a couple of levels. The sweet sound of the stone pickaxe chipping away at the ore echoed in my ears as my experience climbed to level 4. 5. I stopped conserving wood and crafted all my remaining logs into stairs, placing them at intervals along a vertical shaft. After smashing through the ceiling block that kept mobs out, I took a massive leap straight back up to the surface. I took a deep breath of the fresh surface air and blinked up at the blazing sun. I had somehow spent a full day and night underground without feeling the slightest bit tired, pure Steve stamina. My hunger bar was running dangerously low, so I tossed raw meat into the stone furnace to cook it properly instead of eating it raw. Since the fire was still burning and furnace fuel couldn't be reclaimed, I dropped a wolf carcass inside too so nothing went to waste. Standing up after my meal, I tested my boundaries and discovered my active zone had expanded outward in all directions to 27 by 27 blocks. Exponential growth was no joke, meaning I would soon reach Liu village. So I grinned and got ready to punch some trees. Liu Er's father stood at his doorway holding his youngest child and a pack of wolf pelts, asking why Liu Er wasn't coming along to Cheng City. Liu Er shook his head and claimed he needed to stay behind to gather firewood and wild vegetables. His father stared closely into his eyes before warning him to stay away from the opposite side of the forest. And Liu Er replied, "Got it, Dad." After casting a worried glance back inside the house, his father shouldered his pack and finally headed down the path toward Cheng City. Inside the house, Liu Er's mother blinked awake in bed and asked if her husband had already left. Liu Er hurried to her bedside, promising to heat up warm porridge, medicine, and meat for her right away. Before she could ask, Liu Er explained, "Third sister went to town for the excitement with Dad, but I stayed to pick up firewood because the forest is way more fun." He kept busy by the clay stove, stirring the pot without revealing what lurked outside to his mother. Liu Er's mother watched her son bustle around the room, well aware that his reluctance to go to town was just a transparent excuse to stay close. She sat in silence, acutely feeling her own physical weakness. She struggled to get out of bed, but he stepped in immediately to stop her. He gently urged her to lie back down and let him handle whatever needed doing. Even that small effort triggered a severe coughing fit that took a long time to subside. She quickly hid her mouth inside the thin quilt. Quick as she was, I caught a glimpse of red blood on her palm. The terrifying realization hit me hard. Her illness had worsened again. My nose stung, but I swallowed the tears back down and put on a bright smile. "Mom, just rest and get better soon, because I'm still waiting to eat your vegetable cakes." After taking her medicine, she drifted into a heavy sleep, and I tiptoed out to grab my bamboo basket and firewood knife. "Sorry, Dad, but I can't listen to you this time." Walking down the forest path, I recalled my father's grim warnings about monsters that ate human flesh and drank blood. Before I knew it, my hands and feet had turned ice cold. "Hey, Louier, what brings you here?" A familiar voice called out. He stumbled into the open clearing and stared in absolute shock at the mysteriously deforested landscape and me holding my tools. He explained that he was just out gathering firewood while his dad sold wolf pelts in town. Wanting to share, he pulled out a small, saved-up piece of wolf meat and offered it to me. I took a bite and immediately realized the gamey meat lacked any salt at all. Seeing how earnestly he was watching, I reluctantly nibbled away like a hamster and mentioned I would be staying nearby for a few days. "Here, take this." I handed him a gigantic, flawless apple as a return gift for the wolf meat. He stared at it in wonder, asking where on earth I could have found something so large, and I vaguely mumbled about finding it on a tree. "Take it or I'm giving your meat back." I joked when he hesitated to accept it. He grinned happily, planning to keep it a secret from his dad and share it with his mom and little sister. His trip back felt 10 times lighter than the journey in, and he swung his firewood knife through the air with a buoyant skip in his step. Back at my base, I tossed the wolf meat into the furnace. But since it wouldn't cook or burn, I decided to test out a wooden chest instead. I just wanted to run a quick experiment to see if the chest could act as a proper preservation storage space. Got the last iron ingot, time to wrap up. I climbed back up to the surface and dumped the raw ore into the stone furnace. 3 glowing iron ingots were finally ready to be turned into a bucket. A full week had slipped by since Liuer's first visit. Finding iron down here was harder than climbing to heaven, and I had nearly hollowed out the entire underground just to scrape together those 3 ingots. Monsters still hadn't spawned anywhere near my house, which thankfully saved me from any surprise creeper explosions. As for humans, I was entirely confident that no weapon in this world could touch me. With my brand new iron bucket in hand, I could finally haul water up to the surface and start farming. My inventory was already packed with 20 to 30 wheat seeds harvested from tall grass. I dug 3 consecutive holes into the ground and made 2 trips deep underground to fetch water for both ends. The water flowed together to fill the middle space, creating a working infinite water source. My crafting skills haven't gone rusty yet. Infinite water is done. I pulled out my prepared stone hoe and tilled a neat little patch of farmland at a calculated distance. After placing water in the center grid, I planted all my wheat seeds into the fresh soil. Having my own stone house, my own farmland, and plenty of free time to farm felt immensely satisfying. I rested my head on my stone hoe and checked the sun's position, planning to build a fence next so animals wouldn't trample my crops. Liu had visited me frequently over the last 3 or 4 days, bringing wolf meat and thin pancakes. It felt strange that I couldn't see a single person despite a village being nearby. But Liu's daily visits kept me from getting bored. While I was daydreaming about spawning chickens and sheep to start animal husbandry, a sudden voice rang out behind me. Liu appeared carrying a bamboo basket and startled me so badly that I dropped my stone hoe right onto the ground. "Oh man, Liu, you nearly scared me to death." I clutched my chest and put on a dramatic act of being terrified. Liu handed over today's meal of thin pancakes, telling me to eat while they were hot. His eyes immediately drifted over to my newly tilled patch of land, where he noticed the wheat seeds planted in the soil. "Are you planning to grow wheat, Big Brother Bai?" Liu asked curiously. "Yep." I swallowed my pancake in a few bites and rubbed my hands together to brush off the crumbs. "Don't worry, this wheat grows really fast. It'll be ready to harvest in 3 days to a week at most." "A week?" Liu stared at me in absolute confusion. "I just mean 7 days, I explained, leaving him standing there staring wide-eyed at the farmland in total shock. Normal wheat took 220 to 250 days through 12 distinct growing stages to mature. My claim of finishing the entire cycle in less than a week completely shattered everything Liu knew about farming. Liu thought of his family's struggles to scrape by, his mother's heavy illness, and how villagers had recently died of starvation. If his family or the whole village could grow crops this fast, nobody would have to starve. I waved my hand in front of Liu's face to snap him out of his daze. "Once the wheat matures, I'll treat you to some bread that tastes 100 times better than thin pancakes. Big Brother Bai, since you're so amazing, do you know how to practice medicine?" Liu asked with hopeful eyes. "I don't know how to diagnose, but I might have a way to cure illnesses once I get my hands on a missing item. In Minecraft, milk could clear all negative status effects, and I already had my iron bucket ready. I couldn't help wondering whether you could actually milk a bull if you tried." "What's missing?" "Maybe my family has it," Liu asked excitedly. "Do you have a cow at home? Male or female should work." The moment I asked, Liu remembered the village chief's old yellow ox and realized his mother was saved. "Oh, and do you happen to have any string at home?" "Liu?" I asked awkwardly, since I still needed it to make a fishing rod. I recalled from my past research that Minecraft fishing success rates increase if it is raining and there is no cover above the float. Fishing underground just felt like it lacked soul. Liu replied, "String? We still have some left at home. How much does Big Brother Bai need?" I asked him to bring me a ball of string so I could craft a fishing rod and treat him to some fish. Liu agreed, but then asked, "All right, but Big Brother Bai, the nearby rivers are all dried up. Where are you going to fish?" I looked at the iron bucket in my inventory and smiled with confidence. Even if there are no fish, I can still fish them out. After parting ways with me, Liu ran all the way home, completely unable to contain his excitement. He saw his father standing grimly at the village entrance with a wooden stick while his sister cried and pulled his sleeve. Liu's heart dropped instantly, and he shrank back behind a tree. He swallowed hard and nervously wiped his sweaty palms against the rough tree trunk. He stepped out, but his father immediately shouted, "Liu, you still dare to come back?" Before Liu could explain, Liu Da rushed forward and brought the thin wooden stick down hard against his thigh. He cried out in pain as the blow landed. Liu Da yelled that his second uncle had exposed his daily trips and demanded to know what he was thinking. Liu stopped trying to explain as tears streamed down his face, silently taking the increasingly heavy blows. Liu Ye rushed in to shield her brother, begging their father to stop hitting him. Liu Da threatened to hit her right along with him if she didn't step aside. Liu's grievances boiled over, and he shouted right into his father's face that he had found a way to save their mother. The surrounding air froze instantly. When his father demanded to know who told him, Liu blurted out. Big Brother Bai said that as long as we have a cow, he has a way to cure mom. He expected his father to be overjoyed, but saw only deep pain and despondency instead. Liu Da blankly shook his head and pulled his son into a choked embrace. Blaming himself for everything, he asked anxiously what I demanded in exchange. What? Dad, Big Brother Bai is a good person. Liu protested in confusion, explaining that I only asked for a bundle of string. He added that I also seemed to need 2 chickens. Their family cow had already been sold to pay for medicine, leaving only a lone breeding rooster and 3 laying hens in the yard. Liu Da declared that he would deliver the items personally and told Liu to stay put. He spoke solemnly about the future, telling him to rely on his eldest brother-in-law if anything ever happened to him. Knowing his father would lock him in his room, Liu decided to make the first move. He glanced at his worried sister, rolled his eyes, and clutched his leg with a sharp cry of pain. Liu Ye hurried over to support Liu as he limped back. Second brother, why didn't you just apologize? She cried out, terrified that their father might beat him to death. Liu leaned in close and asked his sister if she wanted their mother to get better. He instructed her plainly, if tomorrow Dad tells you not to let me out, you have to open my window for me anyway. I woke up from a pile of leaves with tears in my eyes, letting out a lazy yawn. As a Steve, I didn't actually need sleep, but skipping it all together felt wrong. Life needed a sense of ritual. My bed was literally just leaves spread over wooden boards, which I had just gathered by hand. I stepped on the pressure plate to open my automatic door. The tree saplings I planted around my dirt house had already grown into towering trees, casting deep shadows over the shelter. I rubbed my hands together and reached out into midair with a loud shout. Axe, come. A stone axe instantly materialized in my grip, and I gave it a smug, satisfied twirl. I started chopping down the towering trees with rhythmic swings, watching the blocks instantly vanish into midair straight into my inventory. Liu burst out of the forest with an enthusiastic grin and handed over the ball of string I needed. I thanked Liu and realized I could finally craft a fishing rod. Then I noticed Liu Da standing behind him holding a live chicken, and guessed they must have a favor to ask. Liu awkwardly rubbed his head and explained that he overheard me needing chickens and brought his father along. Meanwhile, Liu Da kept glancing nervously at the floating leaf blocks, rubbing his eyes in absolute terror. Liu Da stepped forward and bowed deeply, offering his own life in exchange for his son's, while holding out the chicken as compensation. I stared in blank bewilderment, wondering why he was offering his life instead of asking me to cure his wife. Had I accidentally been cast as the main villain? I mentally listed my grand titles as Steve, lamenting that my terrible acting skills had completely ruined my first impression. I waved my hand to reassure Liu Da that I had no ill intentions toward his son, and refused the precious chicken. I told him to bring his wife and a cow to my shelter so I could try to treat her. I hesitated because I wasn't even sure if real-world cows produced milk that cured negative status effects like in the game. Giving a normal human a full bucket of milk to chug was a huge unknown. Seeing that I refused to take the chicken, Liu abruptly dropped to his knees and kowtowed on the ground. Big Brother Bai, please take the chicken and let me stay here to serve you as your servant. I was completely caught off guard and told him to get up at once. Liu Da suddenly consented, saying, if it's just as a servant, I agree. I stared at him in total astonishment. Liu Da explained that following a capable man like me was a good path for his son as long as his life was spared. Liu looked up with firm resolve and stated, I want my family to eat their fill. I frowned and reflected on how easy getting food was in modern times compared to this ancient era. Between my Steve respawn mechanics, infinite water, and newly planted wheat, hunger was no longer a pressing concern. I declined the title of master and servant, telling him, servant or whatever is fine, but I do need an errand runner. Taking the chicken from Liu Da, I walked toward the wheat field and announced, I'll take this chicken, it's just right for an experiment. Liu watched in heartache as I punched out 2 of the worst-growing wheat stalks. Under Liu Da's amazed gaze, the dropped wheat seeds flew straight into my inventory. The moment I pulled out the wheat seeds, the 2 tied hens started struggling desperately with their eyes locked onto my hand. Liu Da asked me anxiously, young master, if we just untie them, will they really not run away? I smiled and told him, don't worry, Uncle Liu, just go ahead and untie them. The untied hens waddled straight over to me and calmed down as they stared at the seeds in my palm. They crowded together, and within 3 seconds, a fluffy baby chick abruptly popped up beneath them. I smiled proudly and asked him, well, Uncle Liu, a demon couldn't possibly do something like this, could it? But seeing him standing frozen, wheezing like he was having an asthma attack, I wondered if I had flexed a bit too hard. Liu Da stared in absolute horror as his mind raced to comprehend 2 female chickens breeding instantly without eggs or incubation. He concluded that only an immortal could perform such a miracle. Panicking as he realized he had just mistaken a deity for a demon, Liu Da dropped heavily to his knees and kowtowed frantically, begging, "I didn't know the immortal lord had descended. Please forgive me for mistaking you for a demon." I panicked and rushed forward to lift him up, telling him, "Uncle Liu, you've got it wrong. I'm just an alchemist with special abilities." Terrified of letting an immortal touch him, Liu Da scrambled backward and pulled himself up in a panic. Liu watched in awe, thinking he should probably kneel and kowtow right along with his father. I reached out and stopped Liu from dropping to his knees, telling him, "You just agreed to be my subordinate, so stand straight and stop kneeling." Liu awkwardly straightened up and nervously asked if this was the experiment I mentioned. I figured that if Minecraft rules applied to chickens, they would work on cows too, meaning bulls could be milked just the same. I gave him an encouraging nod and told him, "Bring your mother over whenever you're ready, and I'll see if I can treat her illness." Illness shouldn't be dragged out, so the sooner the better. Liu Da cupped his hands respectfully and asked, "Tomorrow? Does Immortal Master Bai have time tomorrow?" "Only the village chief's family has a cow. After I go back, I will ask the village chief if he can sell the cow to us." I nodded calmly and replied, "Okay then, let's make it tomorrow morning. And Uncle Liu, you don't need to call me Immortal Master Bai. Just call me Bai Li." I waved off the idea of purchasing an animal, telling him that borrowing would suffice and my method would cause no harm. Watching Liu Da's overwhelming display of respect left me feeling utterly helpless. So I just glanced over at Liu and gave him a slight nod. Liu shifted restlessly with an eager, hesitant look that made it obvious he wanted to rush back and borrow the cow. I told them to head back early and gave a final reminder. "You guys should head back now. Don't forget to bring the patient and the cow together tomorrow." Liu waved goodbye with a grin, calling out, "Big brother Bai, I'll be leaving first." I told him to arrive early the next morning and promised to treat him to roasted fish. The moment I disappeared from view, Liu Da let out a profound sigh of relief. He beamed with uncontainable joy, thrilled that his son had bonded with a deity and his younger sister could finally be saved. Liu Da eagerly asked his son, "Liu what does Immortal Master Bai usually like to do?" Liu stuck his tongue out playfully and retorted, "Dad, you wanted to lock me in my room before, and you even hit me. I'm not telling you, blah blah blah." Remorse hit Liu Da hard, and he raised a hand to slap his own face in self-punishment. Liu immediately grabbed his father's arm and reassured him that he was already forgiven. I placed string into the crafting table to decompose it into basic threads. Combining those threads with wooden sticks on the grid produced a brand new fishing rod. I dug out a 2x2 square in the dirt and poured water around the edges. Expanding the pool outward soon turned it into a proper 4x4 fishing pond. I cast my line and watched the bobber float idly on the surface. Unlike the fast pace of the game, a full 10 minutes ticked by without a single ripple. Sunlight filtered through the rustling leaves while fragrant wildflowers swayed in the breeze. I felt the true harmony of nature wash over me, realizing what absolute freedom felt like. The bobber suddenly dipped and plunged beneath the water. I jerked the rod upward and shouted, "Haha, it took the bait," as a jumping cod flew straight into my inventory. Catching a fish on the first try proved the system worked. I hoped my luck would hold out for treasure enchants like efficiency or luck of the sea. My next cast brought up a spiky pufferfish and an utterly useless wooden stick. A wooden bowl popped up next, leaving me to sigh and cast my line right back out. Liu Dexi stroked his whitening goatee and coughed lightly. He reviewed what Liu Da had just reported, asking, "Liu Da, are you saying that the monster you encountered that day is actually an immortal? And he also said he can cure your wife's illness? Is that what you mean?" Seeing the village chief hesitate, Liu Da gritted his teeth in desperation. He offered to trade his family's precious farmland to buy the cow outright if borrowing proved impossible. Liu Dexi knocked his dry tobacco pipe against the stone steps and took a deep puff. He would gladly lend the cow for emergency cash. But using it to cure an illness through an alleged immortal sounded absurd. A severe half-month drought had baked the village's earth into cracked dust. Liu Dexi suspected someone was playing tricks, worrying that refusing would make him a scapegoat while lending it might break Liu Da entirely. Liu Dexi finally agreed to lend the cow on one condition. "How about this, Liu Da? I can lend you the cow, but tomorrow I want to go with you," he added, an immortal descending to earth. As the village chief, I naturally want to go and meet him. If Immortal Master Bai asks, just say this cow is shy around strangers, and it won't budge unless I'm there. What do you think? Privately, he intended to expose the scam, ready to retaliate with his two sons if the treatment failed. Liu Da agreed and left behind meat and wine as a gift before trying to leave. Liu Dexi pressed him back into a chair and said, "You kid, you're always so reckless. You're not short on time, so stay and eat a meal before leaving. What's the rush?" Stepping outside, his face darkened instantly as he told his wife to summon their two sons, before returning with a cheerful jar of wine and a spoonful of peanuts. Liu Da and Liu Dexi sat together drinking wine and eating peanuts for about half an hour. Liu Dexi's two sons arrived and joined the drinking session after receiving a signal from their father. Liu Da beamed with pride as he boasted to the village chief. Even capital imperial physicians said my wife's illness was hopeless, but my son found a way. Liu Da recounted how immortal Lord Bai fed fairy rice seeds to hens, instantly producing 2 to 3 week-old chicks out of thin air. Liu Da beamed proudly as he told how immortal Lord Bai took Liu in as his subordinate. Liu Dexi listened and became increasingly convinced that immortal Lord Bai was a seasoned wandering scam artist who conned Liu Da out of 2 chickens. After Liu Da left, Liu Dexi lit a tobacco pipe and blew smoke rings before asking his sons, "You should understand the situation by now, right?" Liu Dexi stopped his sons from acting rashly, explaining that chasing off the newcomer directly would only make Liu Da resent them. He outlined an ambush trap for the next morning, leaving trail markers so his sons could capture the supposed scammer. Liu Dexi worried about suffering peasants and doubted immortals lived in desolate mountains, sighing in pity for Liu Da if the treatment failed. Liu Da walked home as the cold wind sobered him up, and gently whispered to his sick wife Ye Lan that her illness would be cured tomorrow. Ye Lan asked him, "Did you sell the chickens?" And Liu Da falsely claimed they did not sell any. Ye Lan revealed she knew from the sounds around the house that only 1 or 2 chickens remained, reminding Liu Da of his promise not to sell their belongings. Liu Da reassured Ye Lan, promising that this was truly the last time and everything would be fine tomorrow. Ye Lan recalled a past scam by a shamaness who took their coins, but Liu Da earnestly begged her to trust him one last time for immortal Lord Bai. Ye Lan agreed to go with Liu Da tomorrow, though her heart grew heavier and her body felt even weaker. The next morning, Liu Da woke up early, having had his first comfortable sleep since his wife fell ill. Turning around, a panicked Liu Da found Ye Lan in great pain, delirious, and burning with a terrifyingly high fever. Cursing bad timing, Liu Da listened as Ye Lan deliriously muttered apologies about being a burden. Liu Da rushed to wake Liu telling him to have the village chief get the ox ready immediately while he carried Ye Lan. Liu leaped out of bed and raced frantically to the village chief's house, pounding on the door until a complaining Liu Dexi answered. Liu Dexi grumbled that it was still before dawn and the immortal probably hadn't woken up yet, complaining about being disturbed. Panting heavily, Liu anxiously explained that his mother had a severe fever and was delirious, asking Liu Dexi to get everything ready. Hearing this, Liu Dexi's slight dissatisfaction vanished instantly. Liu Da insisted they needed to hurry, saying, "We must hurry and bring the doctor back while there's still time." Liu grabbed the village chief and begged him to bring the ox instead, shouting, "Chief, we don't need a doctor, we need the ox." Liu Dexi scolded him in disbelief, shouting, "You're thinking of finding an immortal instead of a real physician? You're even more foolish than your father." Tears welled in Liu eyes as he choked out his plea, pressing his hands together. He begged the village chief to lend them the ox, trusting me completely. Liu Dexi let out a heavy sigh of resignation and shook his head. He stepped into the cattle shed and gently patted the old ox's neck to rouse it. Liu Dexi pulled the old ox out into the morning light and agreed to accompany them, saying, "My old bones are still strong enough to keep up." Liu Dexi muttered to himself as he led the ox along the forest trail. He figured the father and son had been completely scammed and wanted to see what kind of charlatan had fooled them, though a faint yearning stirred beneath his skepticism. Liu called out to the approaching group, shouting, "Dad, you're finally here." Liu Yi cleared the dense brush ahead with a machete, while Liu Da ran frantically with the ailing Ye Lan on his back. Liu Dexi hesitated on the path, terrified that believing the rumor would only lead to crushing disappointment. He looked around at the clearing where a dense patch of forest had been reduced to tiny saplings. Liu Dexi cast a pitying glance at Ye Lan, knowing her frail body could barely withstand the bumpy ride and cold morning wind. Liu Da suddenly stopped and slowed his pace with cautious excitement as they neared the spot. Liu pointed excitedly through the thick foliage and shouted, "Look, Bai Li hasn't slept yet, and he's fishing." Liu Dexi stepped forward and saw a well-dressed youth holding a wooden fishing rod by a shallow pond. Countless burning torches lit up the campsite, framing a strange box-like dwelling standing right behind the youth. Liu Dexi squinted skeptically at the crystal-clear water and saw not a single fish in the shallow pool. He wondered how a mere youth could ever be a true immortal. Overwhelmed by bitter disappointment, Liu Dexi concluded that he had been completely duped. A profound sense of helplessness washed over him as he thought the world was truly hopeless. The wooden fishing rod suddenly jerked violently. I pulled upward, and a half-meter-long fish leaped from the water, transforming into a brilliant arc of golden light that vanished straight into my body. With his heart pounding in his chest, Liu Dexi stared with wide, astonished eyes. He was left with a single, undeniable realization. He was truly witnessing an immortal. I stared at another wriggling cod on my line and groaned in frustration. Why couldn't the game just drop me an enchantment book for once? I had fished through the entire night without stopping, and my inventory was now overflowing with 16 cod, 3 pufferfish, and 3 salmon. I dumped out my haul and sorted through the useless junk piling up on the ground. The treasure chests had given me nothing, leaving me with only a wooden bowl, a water bottle, a piece of string, and 2 wooden sticks. Bones would have been useful to make bone meal, speeding up rice growth and expanding my farming plots. Bamboo was even better since I could plant a single stalk along the water stream to farm an infinite fuel source and craft paper and bookshelves. I checked my floating status bar and saw that my hunger bar had barely dropped after pulling an all-nighter. Hearing a familiar voice, I looked up to see Liu approaching alongside Liu Deshi, who was leading an old ox. Liu cried out in sheer desperation, "Bai Li, you're awake, please, you have to save my mother." I pulled an empty iron bucket from my inventory and hesitated before dumping out the clean water inside. Liu Deshi winced with heartache at the sight of precious water being wasted, but caught himself and pulled his foot back in sudden awe of me. I held the empty bucket toward the old ox and mentally triggered the milking mechanic, instantly filling the iron container with milk. That single iron bucket held a full cubic meter of milk, weighing a staggering 1 ton. I told Liu that his mother only needed to drink this bucket of milk to cure her illness. Liu stared at the massive iron container in sheer disbelief and asked, "Bai Li, do we really have to finish all of this?" I reassured him with a calm nod, saying, "Don't worry. This milk won't bloat her stomach. It vanishes once it reaches her throat, though you can stop her halfway if it's too much." Heavy footsteps echoed from the quiet forest as Liu Da finally arrived, carrying the ailing Ye Lan on his back. The poor woman looked deathly pale under her thin blanket. Her arms withered away to little more than twigs. I stepped forward and offered my leaf-paved bed inside my dwelling so she wouldn't have to lie on the freezing ground. Liu Da nodded respectfully and said, "Yes, we'll do whatever Immortal Lord Bai says." Liu called out to snap the village chief out of his daze while the others carried Ye Lan inside. Liu Deshi ignored him entirely, standing frozen in a trance as he stared blankly down at the puddle of leftover water on the ground. As early as a week ago, the groundwater in all surrounding villages, including Liu Village, was nearing exhaustion. The bottomless well in Liu Village only had a shallow layer of water left at the bottom. Liu Deshi stared in utter disbelief at the pristine flowing water left behind by Immortal Lord Bai. The inexhaustible source showed no signs of depletion whatsoever. Afraid of contaminating the sacred source, Liu Deshi cautiously extended a trembling hand. He only dared to test the very edge of the water stream. Without hesitation, Liu Deshi scooped up a handful of water and brought it to his lips. Spring-like sweetness filled his mouth as he realized the village crops were finally saved. Liu Deshi wondered how he could possibly ask the youthful deity for help. Heavy taxes had left the village completely impoverished and utterly lacking in valuable offerings. Liu noticed the village chief's anxious hesitation by the water. He spoke up with quiet determination, saying, "Don't worry, village chief. I know this matters, and I will speak with Immortal Lord Bai after my mother is cured." Liu Da's drunken words from yesterday flashed back into Liu Deshi's mind. A sudden wave of realization washed over him as he looked down at Liu. Liu Deshi gently patted the boy's shoulder with a warm smile. He decided that as village chief, he should be the one to make the request to protect Liu's standing. "I tried to use the system milking mechanic directly on Ye Lan, but nothing happened. That method clearly did not work on other people. I took a wooden bowl out of my inventory and dipped it into the iron bucket. Thick milk swirled in the bowl while the bucket's volume stayed completely full. I told Liu to feed the milk to his wife. He eagerly hurried forward to lift Ye Lan and poured the bowl down her throat. Holding someone else's life in my hands for the first time made my chest feel tight with nervous tension. I exhaled a long breath and decided to have her drink the entire bucket. The wooden door creaked open as Liu and Liu Deshi tiptoed inside. They stopped 5 paces away in absolute silence, terrified of disturbing me. I asked Ye Lan to lift her pinky finger if she felt any discomfort during the treatment. She gave a faint, weak nod from her leaf bed. The moment the milk touched her lips, it began to defy gravity. The liquid flowed upward along the bucket wall and poured straight into her throat. Ye Lan's complexion flushed with a healthy, rosy glow. She opened her eyes and said gratefully, "Thank you, Immortal Lord Bai." With a gentle smile at Liu Da, she drifted into a deep sleep from sheer exhaustion. My heart skipped a beat in sudden panic when her head slumped sideways, making me wonder if I needed a golden apple. Liu Deshi stepped in and calmly reassured Liu Da that she was merely sleeping. I wondered about the identity of the elderly visitor standing before me. I looked right at him and asked, "Old sir, are you Liu's grandfather?" The old man stammered in excitement and blushed red when I spoke to him. Struggling to get his words out, he stammered, I am not Liu's grandfather. I am Liu." Liu stepped in to clear up the confusion. He proudly announced, "He is the village chief of Liu Village. Liu Dexi gave his name and immediately dropped to his knees to worship me. He called out, "Yes, this humble one is named Liu Dexi. Greetings, immortal." My heart skipped a beat at the sight of an old man with white hair trying to bow down to me like that. I moved fast and grabbed his arm before his knees touched the ground. Liu Dexi shook like a leaf, terrified that he had somehow committed an unforgivable crime. I quickly reassured him that I was no immortal. I told him, "Old man, I am no immortal, just an ordinary person with some skills. Call me Bai Li." I knew that without these system abilities, I wouldn't last a month in this chaotic era. Liu proudly pointed toward a young girl hiding behind Liu Da. He grinned and said, "Big brother Bai, this is my third sister, the prettiest girl in our village." Liu Ye was painfully thin and looked just like a bean sprout. She wore oversized, faded, patched clothes and tattered straw sandals with her toes exposed. Liu Ye shyly tucked her rough, calloused hands behind her back and twisted her hem. Seeing her brought back memories of my own bickering sister back home, and a wave of homesickness washed over me. I smiled and told her that since Liu called me big brother, she should call me boss. I pulled several fresh apples straight out of my inventory and placed them into her arms. Liu Ye looked at her father and received a reassuring nod before taking the apples. She held the fruit close and whispered, "Thank you, boss." I drew several buckets of milk and had everyone drink up. The villagers drank the milky liquid and immediately felt a wave of relief wash over them. Liu Dexi closed his eyes and gasped in absolute amazement as his chronic winter leg pain vanished completely. He cupped his hands together and bowed low, saying, "Many thanks, immortal Lord Bai, for the medicine." Liu Dexi lowered his head even further as he gathered his courage to speak. He stammered out his plea, saying, "Immortal Lord Bai, I am bold enough to ask for your help with one matter." I had already figured out what he was going to say based on the severe drought gripping Shaanxi in the late Ming Dynasty. Liu Dexi begged, "It has not rained for 3 months, and the fields are completely dry. Please put in a good word with the Dragon King for water." I told him that was exactly what I had in mind. I opened the wooden door and led the anxious villagers outside. Sunlight filtered through the morning forest leaves and formed dappled light spots on the ground. My group advanced along the winding trail toward Liu Village. Leveling up had been surprisingly easy in the early stage with stable fishing experience. A single night of effort pushed me up 4 whole levels to reach level 8. My spatial range had transformed completely, stretching out to an astonishing 2187 in length. I slowed my pace and reached out until my palm brushed against an invisible boundary. "All right, Liu, let's stop right here." Liu stepped closer with a disappointed look and asked, "Boss, aren't we going to our village?" I wanted to visit the village just to escape the crushing loneliness of the forest. The moment I left, though, my hard-earned small world would collapse into nothingness. I'd love to go, but conditions just don't permit it. I sighed. Liu Dexi stepped forward with a cautious bow and asked, "Immortal Lord Bai, are you facing some difficulty?" I pulled several wooden buckets out from my inventory and lined them up against the air wall. "I can't take the water into the village right now, so please tell everyone to come fetch it here instead." Liu Dexi beamed from ear to ear as he gazed at the flowing water source. "Immortal Lord, don't mention it. We'd gladly walk even a whole day just for this." The water flowed sideways along the invisible barrier instead of running downhill. Liu Dexi figured mortals had no business understanding divine magic and accepted it without question. Liu Da carried Ye Lan on his back, eager to hurry back to the village without lingering near me. Lord Yi's love for dragons flashed through my mind as I looked at their hesitant expressions. "All right, that about covers it. If there's nothing else, you lot can head back now." Liu Dexi let out a massive sigh of relief and hurriedly took his leave. "Hold on a second, Liu I called out before he could turn away. "Once your mother recovers, come find me at the forest since I'll need your help with something." Liu nodded and asked with a curious tilt of his head, "Boss, why do you always stay cooped up in the forest if you hate being alone?" Curiosity really did kill the cat, but I figured I might as well show them. I stepped right across the air wall to test if my expanded small world was sturdy enough to handle it. Liu turned pale with fright and stammered, "Ah? Boss, please step back inside right now. I'm not curious anymore. Relax, it's just a demonstration and everything is under my control." I replied calmly. A few quiet seconds passed before a sudden violent earthquake shook the entire clearing. Liu Dexi stumbled sideways as the ground beneath his feet felt like it was tearing right down the middle. Liu Dexi looked toward me in desperate hope of a miracle. Instead, he caught sight of something so terrifying it would haunt his memories for the rest of his life. Endless twisting black spiderweb cracks spread rapidly across the bright blue sky. The heavens themselves seemed to be shattering apart into infinite jagged pieces. Liu Dexi backed away on weak, trembling legs with absolute horror written across his face. Liu scrambled forward, threw his arms around my leg, and cried out, "Boss, the sky is falling. I know my lesson, please go back inside." Realizing the commotion had gotten entirely out of hand, I quickly hopped back behind the barrier. The sky above slowly healed itself as the dark fractures faded away into normal blue cloud. I scratched the back of my head with an awkward grin and said, "Well, pretty much that." Liu Dexi's wife was up early in the courtyard grinding chicken feed under the crowing roosters. When the door creaked open, she looked up and asked casually, "You're back." "Well, is her illness cured?" Liu Dexi stood at the doorway like his soul had left his body, staring blankly ahead. The everyday routine felt like a dream, but the lightness in his body proved immortals were real. Worried by his silence, his wife wiped her hands on a cloth and walked over to ask if he was possessed. Liu Dexi just murmured that Liu Da's wife was healed and the village water source was found. She rejoiced at first, then frowned and asked anxiously, "Did you have to trade something valuable for it?" Liu Dexi shook his head and said, "No, it was given entirely for free." He kept thinking back to the sky-shattering cracks and the heavy limits immortals faced just to descend. Recalling how immortal Lord Bai had arrived defenseless, he realized the immortal was truly a benevolent deity. Fearing he had lost his mind, his wife rushed to grab a blessed Buddhist prayer bead bracelet. To her surprise, Liu Dexi let her slide it onto his wrist without a single word of protest. Liu Dexi went inside, sat down on a wooden stool, and quietly started drinking a bowl of warm porridge. He suddenly felt a terrible premonition as if he had forgotten something crucial. Then his eldest son burst through the door and yelled, "Dad, we're ready. When are we going to beat up that fraudster?" Cold sweat broke out across his back as his bowl slipped and shattered on the floor. Panicking, he bolted out the door and slammed his eldest son across the back of the head. "Dad, why are you hitting me?" The eldest son cried out in utter grievance. The second son dropped his wooden stick in a hurry, claiming, "Don't look at me, I didn't hear a thing." Liu Dexi struck them again before dropping to his knees to beg immortal Lord Bai for forgiveness. A voice echoed from above, "Never mind that. Gather the villagers and tell them I have something important to say." He sternly warned his sons never to mention the incident again under threat of broken legs. Walking down the village path, the two brothers argued in complete confusion over their father's sudden change of heart. The second son pointed out how agile their father's legs had just been, realizing their father wasn't dealing with a fraudster after all. They hurried off to summon the villagers. I sighed helplessly. This misunderstanding with the villagers was only getting deeper. But honestly, that sky-shattering commotion was incredibly cool. Even if it did startle me at first. I really wished I could fly. The newer versions of Minecraft had an item called Elytra for gliding, which could let me fly if I paired it with fireworks. But I couldn't remember the crafting recipe, and I quickly gave up. The game had lost its joy for me once my friends stopped playing, leaving me all alone in my own world. The milk I gave the villagers was labeled as a milk bucket in my interface. I wondered what Liu and the others were up to. Preparing a few more milk buckets for myself would have been smart, since milk might clear this annoying negative status effect. 2 yellow hens and an out-of-place white chick wandered around my newly fenced chicken coop. A few eggs lay scattered on the grass nearby. Even the chickens had partners to walk around with, which made me feel even more single. I pulled out a few wheat seeds, and the chickens immediately rushed over to me. Breeding a second white chick was a success. Now I had the start of a self-sustaining chicken farm, and I didn't even have to worry about feeding them or dealing with diseases. My wooden axe was almost out of durability. I walked over to the crafting table to make a new one. I clicked on the book icon on the interface. An illusory recipe book popped up, showing a ton of new items I had never seen before. One item called a campfire caught my eye. Its recipe was simple, requiring just 3 logs, 3 sticks, and a single piece of coal. I tapped the button, and the materials automatically snapped into the crafting grid. Placing the campfire on the ground released a thick column of smoke that shot straight up into the air. This fire actually emitted real heat, and it instantly carbonized some weeds I threw in. But then I touched the flames, and they immediately spread to my body. The sharp pain was shocking, and I had to scramble to find a way to put it out. A quick plunge into the water pool extinguished the fire. I dried off and placed 4 raw cod on the corners of the campfire. Cooking them took only a few minutes, which was way faster than using a furnace. Pouring water right over the campfire did nothing, as the flames kept burning underwater and the smoke still rose straight through. The fire only went out when I splashed water directly onto its center. I had no flint and steel to relight it, so I crafted a second campfire to test its permanence. I needed to level up as fast as possible to expand my boundary toward Liu Village, which was about 30 minutes away. My territory reaching the village would finally let me move there. What kind of amazing changes would happen to the village once my system expanded over it? I excitedly grabbed my fishing rod and got back to work. This wasn't just because I liked fishing. It was actually the most efficient way to get stable experience and enchantment books. And it kept me nearby in case Liu came looking for me. Under the scorching sun at the entrance of Liu Village, a group of men squatted on weathered stones with their chests bared. They fanned themselves with straw hats while 4 or 5 shovels lay scattered in the dust around them. Liu Dexi sat unbothered, calmly tapping his tobacco pipe and blowing out a slow smoke ring. One impatient villager stood up and shouted in frustration, "This scorching weather is going to kill me. Chief, why on earth did you call everyone out here?" Unsure what to make of his silence, the villagers dared not leave and quietly sat back down, fanning themselves even more fiercely. Finding water was only part of it, because an even bigger event had happened, an immortal had descended. Liu Dexi planned to let the villagers discover the magical water for themselves so they would actually believe it. Liu Ping arrived with a few men and walked up to stand before his father. Liu Dexi looked up in puzzlement and asked where Liu Qi was. Liu Ping scratched his head and explained that Zhu Zi was dragging his feet. Liu Qi had sent Liu Ping ahead to let the chief know he would arrive shortly. Liu Ping suddenly clapped his hands in realization. "Oh, I get it. This must be about that swindler. About the person on the mountain." A crushing wave of murderous intent surged from Liu Dexi. Liu Ping shivered in cold sweat and frantically stammered to change his words. Liu Dexi stroked his goatee with a smug grin and asked what they lacked the most. The crowd shouted in unison, "Water!" and crowded forward with desperate excitement before the chief forced them back. About 10 minutes later, Zhu Zi finally arrived alongside Liu Qi. The seated villagers turned around and fixed them with resentful, bitter stares. Zhu Zi shrank his neck defensively. "I'm only a little late. Why are you all looking at me like you want to eat me?" Liu Dexi put away his tobacco pipe and declared that everyone was finally here. He led the group down the path he had walked that very morning. The villagers chatted cheerfully about finally being able to water their parched fields. Someone asked if they needed to wait for Liu Da, but Liu Dexi told them that group already knew. As they neared the destination, the excited chatter slowly died down into hopeful silence. Only Zhu Zi wore a bizarre expression as he lagged to the back and pulled a villager aside by the shoulder. Zhu Zi nudged his companion and pointed around in frustration. "Take a good look. Isn't this the exact place we came to yesterday?" Surrounding villagers crowded around to ask if this was Liu Da's haunted spot. A bold villager sneered that he would deal with any strange entity. Zhu Zi patted his chest and insisted there was no water here yesterday. A big villager wondered if the village chief would really lie like that. "If I'm lying, may heaven strike me down and leave me unable to find a wife." Zhu Zi shouted angrily as he swore his desperate oath. Zhu Zi was known for being honest despite his idleness. Since he swore by his dearest wish, the villagers believed him. The villagers carried the news back into the procession. The quiet line instantly erupted into chaotic whispers. Liu Dexi stopped and looked back in puzzlement at the commotion. He called Liu Qi over to investigate what was going on. Liu Qi reported that Zhu Zi had sworn there was no water here. Liu Dexi just stroked his beard with a smug grin. Yesterday, he hadn't even met Immortal Lord Bai yet. This water was a personal blessing granted by the Immortal Lord this morning. Liu Ping joked that water couldn't just pop up overnight unless immortals were real. Hearing that word made Liu Qi suddenly realize the truth. Liu Dexi gave his son a confirming nod. Liu Qi quickly shushed the chatty Liu Ping. Liu Dexi felt a swell of pride at his son's cleverness. He told Liu Qi to guard the rear of the line and stop anyone from leaving. Liu Qi stood rigidly at the back of the line while sensing an unseen gaze watching from above. Far away, I sneezed while fishing. A few villagers tried to sneak back toward the village, but Liu Qi turned them all firmly around. Liu Dexi pointed ahead and called out, "We're almost there. You can go on ahead if you can't wait." Zhu Zi and several others sprinted forward. Excited cheers rang out from ahead as the vanguard discovered water. The remaining villagers rushed forward in a stampede. A crystal-clear stream flowed before them. Zhu Zi stood frozen in despair, lamenting his toxic marriage oath. The villagers rushed to the water's edge and drank frantically. Some even plunged their entire heads straight into the stream. The villagers joyfully drank the stream water and laughed, teasing Zhu Zi that he would never find a wife now. Zhu Zi's face turned red as he loudly defended himself, insisting he truly saw no water here yesterday. Liu Qi stepped forward with a sudden surge of excitement. He finally understood why his father had brought everyone here. Immortals had truly descended. And this water was the proof. Liu Qi inspected the stream's source and noticed something strange. The water vanished a few meters downstream, seeming to generate entirely out of thin air. The packed soil at the base couldn't possibly seep water. A cold shiver ran down Liu Qi's spine as he realized the terrifying truth. This water was infinite. Liu Qi swallowed nervously and asked, "Dad, this water isn't coming from the earth, is it?" Liu Dexi gave a solemn, confirming nod. Liu Dexi recounted last night's events and everything that happened this morning. The villagers murmured in disbelief, arguing that true immortals would visit the emperor instead of their remote village. Liu Dexi told the skeptics to use their shovels and dig up the soil. He recalled Immortal Lord Bai's warning that the primordial water could not be stored and would vanish if it touched the ground improperly. The villagers eagerly swung their shovels into the hillside. In no time at all, half of the packed earth was hacked away. Zhu Zi slapped his own face hard, feeling the burning pain with a wild grin. Everyone froze in absolute shock when the soil was fully cleared. A crystal stream floated suspended in midair, pouring water without any earth beneath it. He shouted that he wasn't dreaming and could still marry a wife. While the others burst into laughter, Liu Dexi told them to keep digging downward along the stream. When asked what the immortal looked like, he shook his head in silent reverence, warning them never to question any stranger following Lu'er and reminding them that immortal Lord Bai hated kneeling. The villagers nodded in deep understanding. They looked expectantly toward the deep forest, imagining the immortal blessing the common people. Liu Er stared at me, looking completely dumbfounded when he realized I had been fishing here the whole time. I let out a habitual yawn and complained, "Unfortunately, all I catch is fish or useless junk." Liu Er bowed his head in deep guilt, apologizing for arriving late because his mother had just recovered from a serious illness. I waved off his apology and handed him a pair of leather boots, telling him, "Here, try these on for size." I told him to wear them so my subordinate wouldn't get laughed at for wearing straw sandals, adding that it was advance payment for his help later. Liu Er stared at the boots with shining eyes, wondering if I was truly an immortal. I gave an awkward, modest smile and played down my supernatural feat with, "Average, average, world's third best." Inside, I couldn't help groaning that leather was worthless trash compared to iron armor. And I hadn't even fished a single enchantment. The moment Liu Er slipped his feet into the leather boots, they visibly shrank to fit him perfectly. He jumped up and flexed his ankles, exclaiming in pure joy over how warm and snug they felt. I let him play for a while before telling him to keep them on for good. Liu Er bounced up from the ground with a flushed face and asked excitedly what we were doing next. Without a second thought, Liu Er drew his knife and slashed hard across his left hand. He stared in utter confusion as his sharp blade failed to leave a single scratch on his skin. I told him to try again with half his strength, which left only a faint white mark. That confirmed my theory. Armor set bonuses protected villagers across their entire bodies, giving a solid 3/5 defense. Liu Er stared down at the boots with immense reverence, feeling completely unworthy of such a divine treasure. I just shrugged and told him that since he already wore them, returning them meant I would simply throw them back in the pool. I reached over and gave his head a vigorous rub, telling him, "For me, your place in my heart is way heavier than you think." I joked that I needed him alive to run errands and take the blame, leaving him moved to tears. I wiped my hand with a teasing grin, complaining, "Now wash your hair more often, because your greasy hair got all over my hand and you could fry fish with it." I winked and told him to tidy up so a young girl might finally fancy him. Liu Er blushed furiously and nodded with great relief, whispering, "Got it, boss." I handed a stone axe to Liu Er and told him to chop down a nearby tree. Liu Er took the tool and suggested I step back, warning, "Boss, you'd better move further away, just in case the tree falls on you." I waved him off with a carefree grin and told him not to worry about me. I was running a crucial experiment to test whether anyone else could actually use my Minecraft tools. Armor had already proven to grant full-body defense just like in the game. But expanding my farmland alone was impossible. Since food production was the priority, fishing was going to be my best bet for now. Liu Er swung the stone axe hard against the trunk. I watched closely as the wood yielded, but no classic white pixel cracks appeared instead. A realistic physical notch grew wider under the blade. The giant tree crashed heavily to the ground, kicking up a thick cloud of dust. That settled it. Even within my Minecraft world, the villagers were bound strictly by real-world physics. I shook off my disappointment and asked how the tool felt. Liu Er weighed the heavy implement in his hand and replied, "It's very sharp, and although it's heavy, it feels quite handy to use." I handed him a stone shovel next to test out digging. We ran through the pickaxe, the hoe, and even tried drawing water with seeds, but every single test ended in failure. My grand plan of having villagers farm independently was temporarily dead in the water. I handed the fishing rod to Liu Er and doubled the size of the nearby pool to give him the best odds possible. I kicked back on a makeshift leaf bed and killed time by munching on a crisp apple. 5 or 6 hours melted away as the sun slowly began its descent. I finally walked over and told him, "All right, Liu Er, reel the rod in. No need to fish anymore." Liu Er stared with stubborn determination at the floating bobber and pleaded, "Boss, let me fish just a bit longer." Seeing my firm expression, he finally handed the fishing rod back with a heavy sigh. I pulled out a composter I had crafted earlier from 7 wooden slabs. I told Liu Er to gather some grass and throw it inside. The weeds vanished the moment they dropped in, leaving a few green composting particles at the bottom. As he kept feeding grass into the barrel, the compost layers crept steadily upward. The contents finally compressed into a rich, podzol-like block. Liu Er reported that nothing more would fit inside. When it came to the final bone meal conversion step, However, he hit a total wall. I told him to try tipping the full container over. Liu Er strained with all his might, veins bulging on his neck. But he couldn't budge the heavy block even a fraction. At least the composter could serve as a solid trade baseline for villagers to exchange bone meal for food. I pulled a stack of grilled cod from my inventory and stuffed them generously into his woven basket. Liu Er waved his hands in a panic as the basket threatened to overflow. I scaled back the fish a bit and handed him 2 fresh apples, one for himself and one for Liu Ye. Liu Er mentioned that he saw plenty of villagers drawing water at the new source when he arrived. I figured I should finally go check out the settlement myself. When I offered to walk him back, Liu Er froze in sheer terror as memories of the day the sky collapsed flashed through his mind. I strolled leisurely down the forest path, holding wheat seeds in hand and whistling a cheerful tune. Behind me, 2 hens fluttered their wings and trotted greedily. Keeping their eyes locked on the wheat, Liu Er kept turning his head back in worry, checking if the birds were still there. I told him, "You don't need to keep staring at those 2 hens. They aren't going anywhere." I joked that if he stopped looking, he might even attract a few wild ones. Liu Er urged me to keep them for hatching chicks. But I told him, "No need. These chickens grow fast, so you should take them back. The eggs will help your mother recover." Liu Er awkwardly scratched his head and admitted that his family saved eggs to sell or give to his father. I remembered how much I grew to hate boiled eggs from being forced to eat them every day while growing up. I blurted out without thinking, "You've never eaten an egg?" The moment the words left my mouth, I wanted to slap myself. It was the ultimate let-them-eat-cake blunder. I frantically waved my hands and apologized, completely flustered by my own thoughtless remark. Liu Er just smiled and reassured me, "Don't worry. Boss, I know you didn't mean any harm." I wiped my brow in relief, joking that I thought my little brother was about to abandon me. Liu Er just blinked in surprise and asked, "But boss, aren't you an immortal?" I quickly corrected him, denying I was an immortal and muttering something about Newton. I told him firmly, "If I make a mistake, I take full responsibility for it, no matter the cost." Liu Er recalled the arrogant nobles riding horses through the city who trampled commoners with absolute impunity, while corrupt officials groveled before them. Liu Er eagerly recited his birth date and thrust his hands forward, asking, "Boss, are you going to tell my fortune? Read my palms too." As we chatted along the path, we drew closer to the water source. A loud commotion echoed from up ahead. A large crowd led by an elderly woman was kneeling in frantic worship facing my direction. They had set up makeshift altars with burning incense, offering up sacrificed chickens, tofu, and withered fruit. Liu Dexi and a few local men stood nearby with stiff, awkward expressions, trying to blend into the worshipping crowd. Liu Dexi muttered in total frustration, "I told you all that Immortal Lord Bai hates it when people kneel. But you just wouldn't listen." I stood at the edge of the clearing, completely speechless and frozen in shock. Liu Dexi looked up and locked eyes directly with me. Liu Dexi broke out in cold sweat, panicking as he misinterpreted my stunned silence for terrifying divine fury. Overwhelmed by the crushing pressure, Liu Dexi collapsed heavily to his knees and shouted, "Immortal Lord Bai." Hearing Liu Dexi's warning, the kneeling villagers shivered and pressed their foreheads tightly against the dirt path. An old woman whispered among the crowd, "That's the Immortal Lord? How come he looks younger than my own kid? He's handsome enough, but he doesn't look like an immortal." I stood there awkwardly, having heard every single whispered word as clearly as if they'd shouted it right into my ear. I waved my hands helplessly and said, "Village chief, I'm really not an immortal. You guys don't need to kneel. Please stand up." When the villagers finally stood up, I gasped in shock. Their thin, ragged clothes had hidden their bodies while they knelt. But now I could see that every single one of them was painfully emaciated, with skin pulled tight over protruding ribs that looked like they could snap in a strong breeze. This was a true famine. I kept quiet and started pulling out wooden boards from my inventory, laying them out on the ground to build a sturdy platform. The villagers stood rigidly in absolute silence, too terrified to make a single sound. Under the scorching midday sun, sweat streamed down their foreheads and straight into their eyes, but not one of them dared to raise a hand to wipe it away. I quickly threw together a 4-meter-wide wooden platform and asked, "Village chief, roughly how many households and people are in the village?" Liu Dexi answered respectfully, 14 households, 54 people in total." I pulled 14 half-meter-long cod from my inventory and piled them onto the platform until every inch was packed full. Suppressed gasps rippled through the crowd as the hungry villagers stared wide-eyed, whispering, "It's fish. Such huge fish." I told Liu Dexi to handle the distribution so every household received a fish, promising to leave the exact same amount here at this time every single day. Liu Dexi stepped forward with a worried expression and asked, "Immortal Lord Bai, are these really all for us?" I noticed the underlying panic and caution in his eyes, knowing he feared the villagers would grow dependent on handouts and turn resentful if the food ever stopped. I shook my head and told him, "Of course not. This is only temporary until your crops recover, and nothing comes for free. I crafted 7 more composters and lined them up neatly along the edge of the platform. I explained the terms to them, saying, "Your task from now on will be to fill these bins with leaves and plants. Liu will explain the exact details to you later. But today's share is free." Overwhelmed with gratitude, the villagers dropped back to their knees and kowtowed so heavily that the loud thuds startled the birds resting in the trees above. Feeling totally awkward and out of place, I signaled Liu and slipped quietly back into the safety of the forest. The moment I left, the villagers' pent-up emotions finally broke into tears of relief and chaotic shouts of joy. Liu Dexi wiped away his own tears and smiled warmly as he told everyone, "All right, folks, today is a truly great day. Take your fish back home and cook them. The kids are waiting." Over the next few days, I spent almost all my time fishing by the pond. At sunset, I carried the catch to the water source and collected white bone meal from the composters. Every night, I used the bone meal to instantly mature my wheat crops, harvesting seeds, wheat, and crucial experience points before diving straight back into intensive nighttime fishing. My experience points soared under that grueling routine, pushing me another level higher with more than half the bar already filled. Just one more level, and I can finally cover the entire village. I turned to Liu and gave him clear instructions. "Liu, if the village changes over the next few days, tell everyone not to panic and just say it was my doing." I couldn't help feeling exasperated whenever I tried talking to the locals. The moment I got close, they froze up like students caught red-handed by a strict teacher, trembling so badly they couldn't spit out a single word. I wasn't even Homelander. So why were they so terrified of me? Liu gave me a worried look and replied, "Understood, boss," even though I told him he didn't have to stay. He insisted on sitting quietly by my side all day, keeping me company and chatting about village gossip. I gave a calm nod and headed back toward my simple dirt house. My only goal right now was to expand my territory straight to the village. Liu felt like he couldn't help me with anything, so he formed a secret resolution and hurried back home. Meanwhile, cured fish hung from the eaves of his modest cottage while Yelan busied herself preparing dinner, her illness fully cured even though her body remained frail. Liu walked in and asked his mother where his father was. She told him his 4th uncle had called him over to help out at the village chief's house. When Liu reached the village chief's house, he found the small room packed with men making a loud commotion. Villagers were busy lugging various pieces of furniture right through the front door. Liu Dexi stood right in the middle of the crowded room, directing everyone with shouts of, "Move it a bit to the left. Now right. Good, right there." Liu stared in disbelief and asked, "Village chief? What are you guys doing? Isn't this chair my great-uncle's prized possession?" Liu Dexi touched the wooden threshold with a wistful expression and explained that they were clearing out his old house to leave it as a proper residence for the immortal lord. Since it was the only decent house in the village, offering it was their way of showing gratitude. And word had quickly brought everyone running with their own best belongings. Liu shook his head and argued bluntly that I would never actually move in, leaving the house sitting empty for nothing. Liu Dexi insisted that whether I lived in it was one thing, but making the gesture was another. And they weren't about to carry everything back now. The surrounding villagers all laughed and refused to take their furniture back. Liu Dexi chuckled as he joked that he had never seen them move this fast or enthusiastically during his entire tenure as village chief. A villager shouted out a joke that if Liu Dexi were half as capable as the immortal lord, they would gladly clean his outhouse every single day, sending the whole room into roaring laughter. Liu Dexi looked around with heartfelt satisfaction, grateful for the first genuine smiles the village had seen since the drought began. Liu Dexi pointed toward the back of the house to show Liu where his father was working. Liu walked over and told his dad that it was getting late and his mother had sent him to call him home for dinner. Liu Da checked the sky and slapped his forehead in realization as the late hour hit him. With a sudden burst of determination, Liu told him, "Dad, I want to resume practicing archery so I can protect the immortal lord." Liu Da felt a wave of deep happiness seeing his son pick up his training again after giving it up to conserve food during the desperate days of the drought. Liu Da couldn't help wondering silently if an immortal actually needed mortals to protect him, but he nodded anyway and told his son they would start training again tomorrow. A villager slammed the door in my face and yelled, "Zhang Yong Yuan, you bastard, this is the last time. We have no food left for you, so get lost and stop freeloading, or I'll break your legs." I spat toward the door and muttered that I didn't want their pig slop food anyway. They would regret it once I finally made something of myself. The door swung wide open again with a sharp crack as Liu Da stepped out clutching a thick binding rope. "You bastard, come back here and say that again to my face." Panic took over the moment I saw that rope, and I scrambled away like a frightened animal toward the edge of the village. Liu Da spat in the dirt and bellowed after me, "Drop dead, coward, because you won't get a single morsel from us ever again." My stomach churned with hunger as I crouched in the dirt. wondering how a whole village could be so stingy after all the chores I'd helped with. That household was clearly a dead end, so I figured I would just have to make up for it by taking a few things from the village chief's house when nobody was looking. The ground outside Lu village was completely parched and picked clean. I scavenged through the cracked earth, coming up with nothing more than a pathetic handful of bitter roots. Liu village and Zhang village sat right next to each other across barren fields. Both settlements shared a bitter, unyielding rivalry over the last remaining strips of fertile farmland and dry riverbeds. Months of severe drought had dried up every water source in sight. Anyone caught trespassing into a rival village just to forage for wild grass could expect a brutal, bone-breaking beating. I froze in my tracks as a faint breeze carried a familiar, mouth-watering scent right to my nose. There was no mistaking that smell. Someone was cooking fish. The sheer craving for meat completely overpowered my fear of getting caught. I told myself I was just taking a quick look and crept quietly past the village entrance. The main path through Liu village was suspiciously deserted, with not a single soul in sight. Yet the rich aroma hanging in the air kept pulling me forward. I hid behind a stone wall and stared in utter disbelief. Cooking smoke and rich fish aromas were rising from not just one house, but virtually every single home in the village. I frantically rubbed my nose and squeezed my eyes shut. It made no sense at all. How could a drought-stricken village have fish in every single household? The smell was simply too strong to walk away from. With my eyes reddened from hunger, I crept up to a wooden door and pressed my ear directly against the frame. Voices drifted out clearly from inside the room. "Here's some freshly made fish soup. Come try it and see how it tastes," one villager said, while another praised the rich flavor and talked about enjoying it every single day. Someone inside chimed in, "That's all thanks to the immortal lord. Or we wouldn't even have wild vegetables to eat." Immortal Lord? What kind of bizarre name was that, anyway? My stomach let out a thunderous growl right against the quiet doorframe. A chair scraped loudly against the floor inside, and I bolted away in sheer terror before anyone could spot me. Liu Da stepped out onto the porch and scratched his head in confusion. Wondering aloud, why did he run off so fast? I was just going to invite him in for a bowl of fish soup. I panted hard against the wall, feeling lucky I had managed to escape before anyone grabbed me. My legs gave out completely, leaving me sprawled flat on the ground in total exhaustion. I glared back at the villagers hesitating outside our boundary and mocked them. The fish were just too heavy to carry while sprinting away, so I had to toss every single one of them aside during my dash. A wicked thought crossed my mind as a cunning smirk spread across my face. Why handle this alone when I could just tell the village chief and let him deal with Lu village? I peeked cautiously through a crack in the wooden door before slipping inside. Rows of massive cured fish hung densely from the rafters, and I grinned at the sight of my new loot. A full earthenware water vat sat right in front of me. I grabbed the gourd ladle and gulped down the water greedily, splashing droplets everywhere. I grabbed a piece of leftover fish from the cabinet and chewed it in pure bliss. The bowl was licked completely clean in seconds, but I found nothing else left in the cupboards. What a bunch of poor misers without a single copper coin to their name. I stared up at the hanging fish with hungry, obsessive eyes. Tucking two massive fish firmly under my arms, I got ready to haul them back. A child's voice suddenly pierced the air with a shrill shout of, "There's a thief stealing fish from our village." Panic took over, and I bolted through the doorway without looking back. I finally made it back home and caught my breath, muttering angrily about how those villagers chased me all the way to our doorstep. That delicious smell in the air proved my suspicion. Liu village had deliberately diverted our water supply to starve us out. They had acted without any justice first, so I had no reason to feel bad about taking what should have been mine. I crouched quietly by a thatched cottage at the edge of the village, waiting until everyone finished lunch and cleared out. I spotted Zhang Hu returning with his back basket and ran over, waving my arms with a loud greeting. Zhang Hu scowled in pure annoyance, hastily hiding his rotten vegetable roots before slamming his wooden door shut in my face. I protested loudly outside, demanding to know why I was locked out when I came with important business. "These are for the little ones to boil in hot water," Zhang He murmured with a rare, fond smile as he placed tiny wild fruits on the table. Zhang He ignored me entirely and waited inside, expecting my footsteps to fade away after a minute. I pretended to walk off while dropping a casual hint about finding water. The word water made Zhang He jerk the door wide open in an instant. "Where is it?" he demanded anxiously, while I simply smiled and offered to drop an old debt. "What else do you want?" Zhang He sighed in sheer resignation, and I calmly asked to borrow 10 more copper coins. Furious veins bulged on his forehead as he yelled his refusal, knowing any coin given to a gambler like me was gone for good. I stood my ground with absolute confidence until Zhang He gritted his teeth and pulled out a small bag of coins. I grinned greedily while counting the copper coins, and Zhang He demanded, "Now, tell me everything." A crowd of angry villagers gathered outside the village chief's son's house. talking over each other in agitation. Liu Dexi frowned at them and asked, "You mean someone from the rival village came over to steal things?" A villager angrily stated that the fourth family's child spotted the thief just in time, or else his 2 fish would have been stolen. The surrounding crowd complained that the rival village had escalated from fighting over water and land to outright theft. Liu Dexi shook his head thoughtfully, telling the crowd, "No need to go, they will come find us themselves." Most villagers suddenly understood his meaning, while a few remained completely clueless. A villager demanded justice from the village chief for the theft of fish bestowed by immortal Lord Bai. They clamored to retaliate against the rival village and demanded the thief be handed over. A villager sighed with complex emotions, realizing Lu village wasn't the other village's only target for survival. Villagers debated how fish imply a river, while someone reminded the rest that Lu said immortal Lord Bai caught them in a fishless pond. They realized the rival village only knew fish meant water, making them desperate to investigate. Liu Dexi warned the crowd, "If anyone from the rival village comes later, let me know immediately and do not start any fights before then." To Liu Dexi's surprise, all the villagers silently nodded in agreement without objecting. He realized that the rival village was simply a reflection of what Liu village used to be. Zhang He anxiously paced at the entrance of the rival village. He looked toward Liu village while surrounded by a crowd of eager villagers. Zhang He originally wanted to keep the matter quiet, but Zhang Yongyuan spread the news across the village anyway. Zhang Yongyuan casually kicked stones and defended himself, claiming he would never lie about such a major matter. Villagers shouted that someone was finally returning down the path. Zhang Hu squinted intently and saw a figure stumbling toward them in the distance. The panting scout reported that almost every household in Lu village had large fish half an arm's length. The scout gasped out, "Zhang Yongyuan is telling the truth." Zhang Yongyuan smugly asserted that Lu village must have diverted water to a hidden location. He didn't care about the truth as long as it gave his village a convenient excuse. Zhang Yongyuan falsely played the victim, claiming he was almost beaten up by Lu village. His fabricated story incited a furious uproar among the villagers. Overwhelmed by public pressure, Zhang He reluctantly agreed to a confrontation tomorrow. He told everyone to rest up and save their energy for the next day. Zhang Yongyuan returned to his room and dropped his act entirely. A deeply satisfied smile spread across his face as he realized his plan had succeeded. In the afternoon, more than a dozen men from Liu village waited at the dusty yellow sand hillside boundary between the 2 villages. One of the guards yawned and complained about standing around all afternoon waiting for the rival village's people to show up. A prudent Liu village guard pulled back an impatient villager to prevent any premature conflict. "Quick! Go call the others over right now. The rival village is here," a guard shouted while pointing urgently. In the distance, the rival villagers approached with solemn faces, carrying farm tools with blades freshly sharpened on a grindstone. Zhang He stepped forward and asked if Liu Deshi instructed them to speak this way, and the guards confirmed it. They had prepared for a fatal fight because seizing water during a severe drought was a matter of life and death. "Hey, listen up, Zhang village. I know you're here for water, so just wait there and we'll bring it over to you," a Liu village guard shouted across the distance. "This isn't just about water. Even though Zhang Yongyuan is a jerk, he's still from our village and we need to get justice for him." "Crap!" A Liu village man spat angrily and shouted that the rival villagers had actually sneaked over to steal things. He furiously clarified that their water was granted by immortal Lord Bai. The rival villagers realized Zhang Yongyuan had lied and felt thoroughly shamed by the theft. "Village chief, we know you're friends with Liu village's chief, but this is a huge matter and we can't delay." About 10 minutes later, Liu village people arrived carrying poles loaded with buckets filled entirely with water. Zhang He was puzzled to see that the mobility-impaired Liu Deshi managed to keep up with the water delivery team. "Is all this water really for us?" Zhang He asked with a trembling voice, suppressing immense joy. "These water buckets and fish are for you to use first. Now bring 2 decision-makers and follow me to the water source," Liu Dexi replied. Zhang He asked if Liu village wasn't worried about running out of water by sharing the source. Liu Dexi reassured him that the village agreed and the water supply was more than enough. Zhang He and Liu Dexi walked side by side on the path, with 2 rival village men following 5 paces behind in silence. Zhang Hu asked who the immortal lord referred to. Liu Dexi gave a meaningful look and asked if he believed that the immortal lord was an actual immortal. Zhang He muttered in shock that he finally understood why Liu village was willing to share water. He advised Liu Dexi to hide the fish and warned him that the corrupt official Zhang Do Yao had sent tax collectors to rob multiple villages. A panicked Liu village villager ran up and reported that Liu Dexi's house had been broken into and items stolen. "What?" Liu Dexi turned stiffly to Zhang He and asked if this was his plan. The house in question was the sacred residence prepared for immortal Lord Bai. carefully cleaned and maintained daily by villagers. Zhang He firmly denied any involvement in the break-in. He suddenly remembered that Zhang Yongyuan was absent and angrily struck his cane against the dirt path, identifying him as the culprit. Liu Dexi lamented that the issue wasn't the stolen items, but that the residence reserved for the immortal lord had been ransacked. Out of shame and anger, one rival villager sprinted back to their village to catch Zhang Yongyuan while Zhang He stayed behind. Zhang Yongyuan unloaded the stolen fish on his table, celebrating his 7-day food supply. His celebration was abruptly cut short as his door was violently kicked down. "These are the fish I took from Liu village. How about I give you one?" Zhang Yongyuan offered nervously. Enraged, the villager pushed him aside, packed all the fish into a basket, and ordered 2 men to drag him to Liu village. "It was just fish, I don't want them anymore. Just don't take me to Liu village." Annoyed by his screams, the leader delivered a heavy punch straight to his stomach. "This is the guy who stole from your village twice. Do whatever you want with him," the leader told the crowd. Liu village villagers gritted their teeth in intense hatred, but held back from beating him for fear immortal Lord Bai was watching. Zhang He stepped forward and publicly announced that Zhang Yongyuan was permanently expelled from the village. "No, village chief, you can't do this." Zhang Yongyuan's legs buckled as total despair crushed him. He wept hysterically and kowtowed into the dirt, begging for mercy and offering to cut off his right hand. Zhang Hu ignored the pleas and looked to Liu Dexi, who saw his villagers nod and agreed to the banishment. Zhang Yongyuan sobbed uncontrollably in absolute ruin, realizing he had no home left and could not even enter his ancestral tombs. "Please, it's not that we won't pay, but months of drought left our crops completely ruined, and we have nothing left," an elderly villager begged as he knelt in the dirt before the tax collectors. A tax collector kicked the old man straight to the ground with a brutal stomp. Wang grabbed a firewood chopper and tried to chase after them in pure rage. The tax collector sneered that anyone alive in the village had to pay up regardless of drought or locusts, or face charges of rebellion. Nearby villagers desperately held him back, shouting, "Wang don't be reckless. We can't kill them." The lead tax collector ordered his men to ransack every home by force. "What kind of court gives us no way to survive?" Wang gritted his teeth in fury. They tore through doors and searched cellars until they unearthed a small hidden bag of mixed rice. He hoisted the small bag high and glared at the terrified crowd. Since death was certain either way, a dark thought formed in his mind. Why not just rebel? Convinced they were hiding more, the tax collector dragged out a villager and beat him repeatedly with an iron ruler to force answers. The lead tax collector complained about the poor yield and led his men toward Liu village. The tax collector cursed the villagers as thick-skinned while rubbing his swollen hand. Once the tax collectors finally left, suppressed sobbing filled the desolate village. Following village chief Liu Dexi's prior instructions, the villagers quickly rolled in the dirt and smeared yellow clay on their faces to look starving and weak. Liu Dexi stepped forward with a mournful, forced smile to greet them. "Stop right there," the lead tax collector interrupted dismissively, anticipating the usual drought excuses. Another tax collector cracked an iron ruler in the air and threatened them with arrest. Liu Dexi calmly smiled and pulled a money bag from his robe, saying, "This is the tax our village owes, paid in full today." A hungry child cried out in his mother's arms, and she gently rocked him to sleep so he wouldn't feel the hunger. Meanwhile, a tax collector counted the coins and confirmed the exact amount matched the debt. The tax collector slapped his forehead, pretending to have mixed up the village taxes. Liu Dexi told Liu Qi to fetch another money bag from his table while asking the officials to wait. The head tax collector smirked greedily, plotting to ransack the village, bribe the county magistrate, and keep the rest. Liu Dexi respectfully held out a heavy money bag, asking the officials to count the amount. The head tax collector angrily snatched the money bag right out of Liu Dexi's hands. He kicked open a wooden door and threw household belongings all over the floor. Villagers stood close together with tense expressions, implicitly blocking the path to a shabby small house. Liu Dexi sighed heavily, stepping forward to block the entrance of the humble shrine house. "This is a residence reserved for the immortal." The head tax collector narrowed his eyes with a sly grin as he realized something valuable must be hidden inside. The head tax collector violently unsheathed his saber, pointing the lethal blade forward. Liu Dexi spoke with unwavering resolve, warning that offending immortal Lord Bai would bring punishment. He shouted threats of destruction and accused the villagers of treason. The tax collector flew into a rage, accusing Liu Dexi of intimidating officials and targeting him first. The tax collector twisted his mouth in utter disdain, mocking the notion of any living immortals. "Search the place and kill anyone who tries to stop you." The head tax collector raised his heavy saber high with a cold, ruthless expression. Liu Dexi stood firm with a resolute expression while blocking the path. An arrow accurately struck the hilt of the tax collector's saber, sending it flying onto the dusty ground. Liu stood not far away, holding a bow and panting heavily with a frightened expression, enraged to find the archer was just a teenage boy. The head tax collector pointed right at him. Anyone who attacks an imperial officer deserves death. Kill him. Two subordinate tax collectors stood hesitantly in the background out of a shred of conscience. The ruthless head tax collector charged forward himself, and village youths rushed in barehanded to block him. Suddenly, the head tax collector froze mid-attack, his face turning completely blank and bewildered. What on earth is that? In the distance, the parched yellow sand instantly turned green, spreading rapidly toward the village. Lush patches of wild grass sprouted across the dust and soil in a miraculous display. The head tax collector felt a giant shadow and whipped his head around in alarm. Villagers joyfully knelt in unison on the soft green grass with tearful, reverent expressions. A towering 3-meter-tall iron golem with iron-white blocky skin and green vines stood right behind him. It's the Immortal Lord. The Immortal Lord has manifested his power. The head tax collector flew backward like a broken ragdoll before slamming hard onto the ground, knocked completely unconscious, terrified that the spreading grass was coming for them. The tax collectors curled up on the ground. They trembled and cowered with their arms over their heads, begging frantically for their lives. The iron golem swung its massive arm downward with overwhelming force. After dealing with the leader, the iron golem stood in place, staring fixedly at the two remaining tax collectors. The terrified subordinates whispered in panic, wondering why the golem was ignoring them. Villagers gathered around Liu Dexi to ask what they should do with the kowtowing tax collectors. A tax collector collapsed onto the grass, desperately kowtowing with loud thuds. "Have mercy, Immortal. We were just following orders and promised to stay silent." Liu Dexi replied with a knowing smile that Immortal Lord Bai was about to arrive, so they should just let them stay. A villager pointed worriedly at the unconscious lead tax collector lying motionless on the dirt path. Liu Dexi waved his hand dismissively, asserting that imperial authority could never override divine will. Sensing something, the iron golem walked up to a frightened child and gently extended its massive metallic hand. The timid child stared wide-eyed and bravely accepted a small red flower. The happy child held up the red flower to his mother, exclaiming how pretty it was. Liu Dexi smiled warmly, deciding to let Liu ask Immortal Lord Bai about the giant construct once he arrived. "I couldn't help complaining after breaking countless fishing rods and catching enough fish to make me want to gag. Breaking past that brutal grind meant I could finally pack up my things. Though my inventory check revealed I was completely broke aside from a box of fish and trash. My harvested bamboo was growing nicely, alongside a glowing Infinity Eye enchantment book and a pair of Frostwalker 2 leather boots. Testing those magic boots took a good half-hour in a custom pool before I packed them away and strapped on some regular, half-durable boots instead. A stack of cooked fish and some wood took care of my travel food. But my white chickens presented a real logistical puzzle. Raising them had been easy enough since they multiplied into 4 adults and 2 chicks without needing cleanup. But transporting them without leashes was going to be tricky. Locking the door behind me, I hummed happily as I walked out toward the forest edge. That stubborn habit kicked in anyway, forcing me to turn right back around and tug on the frame to make sure it was really shut. Running and jumping down the familiar path to the water source felt incredible in the open air. The rushing wind brought a sense of pure freedom I had never known in my old high-pressure life. Expectations of a bustling crowd vanished the moment I arrived at the water source and found it nearly empty. Unfamiliar strangers hauled water in silence, ignoring me completely as an outsider likely from the rival village. A local villager answered my request by detailing a dizzying sequence of lefts and rights. "That's simple enough. I've got this," I figured, waving off his offer to guide me with absolute confidence. Naturally, I got hopelessly lost down a dead end and had to slink back in defeat. The helpful villager pretended not to notice my awkward return while finishing his buckets. Staring intensely at the round river stones was my only defense against total embarrassment until a smiling woman walked over. She didn't know I was the one who placed the water here in the first place, making her local theories pretty amusing. Leaning in close, she whispered local secrets about an immortal living on the mountain who made the water flow endlessly. "This water is sent by the mountain immortal, a divine flow that never runs dry." She tried to drag another villager over to prove her wild story, swearing on her grave that it was true. All right, I believe you," I blurted out, waving my hands frantically to shut her down before I died of embarrassment. The villagers advised me to stay put in Liu village, where tax collectors wouldn't dare cause trouble under divine protection. With his buckets filled, the friendly villager hoisted his carrying pole and led the way forward. Guided by the villager, I sped through the dense jungle until he suddenly stopped to inspect the altered surroundings. "Wait, let me take a closer look," he muttered. The familiar barren wasteland was now choked with tall trees and thick grass that swallowed the paths whole. "This has got to be an immortal's handiwork," the villager whispered in sheer awe. I rubbed my chin and stared at the thicket. realizing the sudden terrain expansion was just a side effect of my recent level up. Liu Da patted his chest and confidently reassured me that he could still find the general route to Liu Village. When I offered to carry his load, he just laughed and joked that he couldn't afford to pay for my clothes if they got dirty. Before the guide could speak, I pointed straight toward a distant village outline on the horizon. Liu Da stared wide-eyed in total shock, utterly dumbfounded by my superhuman eyesight. Stopping near the village boundary, Liu Da told me he wouldn't escort me any further, since it would be improper for someone from Zhang Village to just walk in. I cupped my hands and thanked him for the help. I walked along the dusty path toward Liu Village, planning to ask the village chief about Zhang Village later so I could place a water block for them as a thank you gift. The moment I arrived, Liu Village erupted into a festive celebration with firecrackers, swana horns, and erhu music. Villagers lined up neatly with clasped hands raised, chanting, "Welcome, immortal Lord Bai." In unison, I turned around at a sudden gasp behind me, only to find Liu Da dropping his shoulder pole in absolute shock. Water splashed everywhere across the dirt while he stood completely numb, panicking over the fact that he had just guided an immortal all the way here. An iron golem was standing right inside the village square, filling me with ecstatic joy. Its spawn confirmed that Liu Village was officially recognized as a village within my influence range. Opening the door to infinite iron, 2 government bailiffs were kowtowing frantically before the iron golem, while a third lay stiffly nearby. "Liu, what's going on with these bailiffs?" I asked. He quickly explained, "This big guy saved my life from them." I gave the bailiffs a cold, indifferent stare, figuring the injured one could stay down for all I cared. If the local magistrate wanted trouble, I was more than ready to fight them. I mentally mapped out a full tactical defense using water walls and lava and water stone barriers. If anyone pushed too far, I could just build up into the sky and dump a bucket of lava right over their headquarters. Thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't leveled up in time left me with a lingering sense of unease. I walked forward with a stern expression to deal with the remaining bailiffs. The surviving bailiffs kowtowed frantically on the grass, begging for mercy and claiming the extortion was entirely their leader's idea. I wrinkled my nose in disgust at a sour smell, watching a dark, wet patch soak right through one bailiff's trousers. Blood streamed from their bruised foreheads, staining the turf beneath them as they kept bowing, figuring they had suffered enough after their boss got thrashed by the iron golem. I decided to have a little fun with them. I put on a solemn expression and told them they would spend their next lives reincarnated as animals in the realm of beasts. I had no actual power over anyone's afterlife, but since they had no way of knowing that, a harmless bluff felt like fair game. The prospect of losing his human form scared one of them out of his wits, and he turned completely pale before fainting flat on his back. The other bailiff pressed his face straight into the dirt, crying as he choked out, "Lord Immortal, please. Is there any way to expiate our sins? We want to stay human." Their reaction was a bit more extreme than I intended, so I sighed and decided to throw them a lifeline. I raised a hand and magnanimously granted them a conditional chance at redemption through good deeds, promising to reconsider their reincarnation fate later. The conscious bailiff promised, "We will never breathe a word of this." As for our leader, he simply took an accidental tumble down the mountain. He shook his fainted companion awake, and together they hoisted their injured boss up between them to flee in a panic. I suddenly called out, causing the fleeing men to tumble head over heels onto the dirt path in pure terror. I sternly told them to report back to their county magistrate that Liu Village simply could not pay taxes. Liu stared up at me with starry-eyed awe, wondering if I could put in a good word so he could remain his father's child in his next life. He then tilted his head and asked why I let the bailiffs leave empty-handed when the village actually had the silver to pay. I explained that just because Liu Village could afford it didn't mean the impoverished neighboring villages could. That corrupt county magistrate was squeezing people ruthlessly during a severe drought. Paying taxes now would only invite endless miscellaneous levies and encourage the magistrate to bleed other villages dry. Natural disasters mixed with man-made bureaucratic oppression were exactly what drove desperate peasants to rebel. I told Liu to ask the village chief if there was any open land nearby where I could build a house. Liu eagerly pointed toward the village and suggested I move straight into a brand new, unused house the villagers had already prepared for me. I smiled and gave Liu an affectionate pat on the head upon hearing about their thoughtful arrangement. I shook my head and politely declined the furnished dwelling, preferring to construct my own custom base for comfort and to pass the time. Left alone in the village square, I found myself wrestling with a tricky dilemma regarding the patrolling iron golem. While it had saved the villagers and earned my gratitude, it remained a lethal threat that would instantly turn hostile if any action was misconstrued as harming a local. The towering golem suddenly turned its head to lock eyes with me, giving off an eerie sense of true intelligence. I raised my hand and called out, "Big guy, come over here." The massive iron golem stepped right up to me and conjured a cluster of bright red poppies, holding them out directly in front of my face. There were far too many to hold easily, so I cupped the flowers in both hands while a faint, elegant fragrance drifted through the air. "Thank you, big guy," I smiled. "These smell amazing." Seeing me accept the flowers, the golem swayed from side to side, its expressionless metal face completely betrayed by its happy body language. It felt less like a naturally spawned village golem and more like a custom creation I had personally crafted with a carved pumpkin. I tested it with a direct question, asking if it could understand me, and the golem gave a heavy, distinct nod. I told it to answer all future questions using only head nods and shakes, and it readily agreed. When I asked if it would retaliate if I attacked or even killed it, Tai Shan shook its head without the slightest hesitation. It even gave a brief pause of hesitation before decisively shaking its head when I asked if it would fight back if I attacked villagers. The moment I asked if it would protect me from outside attackers, Tai Shan nodded vigorously in agreement. However, when I asked the fourth question about whether it would help me attack villagers, it froze in awkward confusion. Its heavy metal head slowly began to nod up and down again, the movement gradually growing larger as it answered. I tapped a light fist against its massive iron chest and declared, "I'm very satisfied. From now on, you're with me." I stepped back and looked it over, deciding to name it Tia Shan given its massive iron build. Though it couldn't speak, Tia Shan waved its iron arms and spun around me in circles with clear delight. After sending Tia Shan off to patrol, I decided to wander around the village and familiarize myself with the local terrain. Curious villagers and children peeked out nervously from behind thatched houses as I walked past. Before I could get far, Liu Dexi hurried over with an undisguised expression of pure joy. Liu Dexi felt like a massive windfall had just dropped from the sky upon learning I intended to stay long-term. "Have you found a good spot, Immortal Lord?" he asked eagerly, and I nodded toward a flat patch of ground at the village edge. I plan to build a proper 2-story house, complete with a bathroom to make up for my past life regrets. This land has always been empty and unclaimed, so you can build right here, Liu Dexi hastily assured me. I decided to settle on the spot and asked him to have the villagers stop calling me Immortal Lord. I told him to have everyone address me as Young Master Bai instead. A frantic voice suddenly shouted in panic as Liu Ping came running down the path toward us. Liu Dexi turned to scold him, only to drop his jaw in utter shock at the square, semi-illusory straw hat floating right above his son's head. Liu Dexi looked worriedly at me and addressed me as Immortal Lord before correcting himself to Young Master Bai, deeply concerned over Liu Ping's sudden strange transformation. A semi-illusory straw hat was floating right above Liu Ping's head. I couldn't help wondering why the rest of the villagers hadn't changed yet. Given that iron golems required a certain number of villagers to naturally spawn, trading was my first method to test for villagers. But my attempts had failed. Liu Ping's abnormality had to be caused by something during his absence, so I needed answers. I told him, "Don't worry, this straw hat won't harm you. In fact, it brings unexpected benefits." Liu Ping explained that he had gone to the forest to fetch water when their supply ran out, and returned with the hat. I suddenly remembered placing a composter block near the water source, realizing he had bound to it and turned into a farmer. The villagers weren't untouched, they had just been converted into jobless villagers, which explained why the iron golem could spawn. Farmers could farm, meaning turning the whole village into farmers would completely solve our food crisis. I took out a crafted stone hoe from my inventory and handed it to Liu Ping, telling him to use it on the ground. He gripped the tool tightly with sweaty palms, and after using it, reported that some of his physical strength had been sucked away. Next, I handed him wheat seeds and told him to try planting them the same way. He successfully planted the seeds and reported that his physical strength had flowed into the wheat, though much less than before. Liu Dexi and Liu Ping earnestly begged me, saying, "Young Master Bai, could you let us keep this wheat and let it grow?" To keep the tilled soil from reverting, I dug a small pit next to the wheat and poured water from my bucket into it. I told them it needed no weeding or pest control, but warned them not to jump on the fragile crops. Liu Ping eagerly ran off to call the rest of the villagers over. I placed a crafting table on the ground and started crafting composter blocks, determined to give straw hats and profession statuses to everyone in the village. At Liu Ping's call that Immortal Lord Bai had summoned them, the villagers hurriedly rushed over, some even dropping their heavy hoes right in the dirt. Liu Ping proudly mingled into the crowd at a conspicuous spot, flipping and adjusting the square straw hat on his head. "Ha ha ha, look at that strange square hat Liu Ping is wearing." A villager laughed out loud, pointing right at him. Surrounding villagers stared at the mocker with deadpan expressions before explaining, "That's a divine artifact bestowed by Immortal Lord Bai to grow immortal wheat." The villagers subtly slowed their pace, letting the hat-wearing Liu Ping walk at the front of the procession. Upon approaching my location, the villagers instinctively fell silent, slowed down, and quietly found spots to wait. I announced to the gathered villagers that I would convert them all into farmers by giving each of them a straw hat. I warned them that the straw hat might become permanently attached and could not be removed, making it entirely optional. The villagers beamed with joy, thinking that even if it were a green hat, they would gladly wear it as long as it grew immortal wheat. I left the order of conversion to village chief Liu Dexi, then stepped back to place a row of composter blocks inside a dirt pit. Liu Dexi called Liu Wusan to go first, keeping in mind that Liu Er's family had separate arrangements. Liu Wusan nimbly jumped into the pit, and shortly after, a semi-illusory square straw hat appeared above his head. Liu Wusan excitedly thanked me after realizing he had received the hat. As time passed, nearly half the villagers successfully got hats, but when Zhu Zi stepped up, the illusory straw hat failed to appear no matter how long he waited. Zhu Zi climbed out dejectedly and returned to the line, causing anxiety among those who hadn't tried yet. Most of the subsequent villagers who entered the pit also ended up failing the conversion. Liu Dexi explained to me that those who successfully gained recognition were simply the best farming experts in the village. I felt a bit regretful, having wanted to reserve some villagers for other professions like librarians who sold enchanted books. I realized librarians likely required literate villagers, and nobody in Lu village appeared to have ever studied. Curious about trading with the newly converted farmers, I opened the trading interface and was instantly stunned by the extremely unfair exchange rates. 20 wheat for 1 emerald? Even scalpers weren't this ruthless. Suddenly, I stopped flipping through the pages and stared in pleasant surprise at a new trade item. Watermelon seeds. I honestly didn't hold high hopes of finding anything extraordinary when trading with villagers. In the original game, it was flat out impossible to get any seeds from villager trades. Knowing we were stuck in ancient times where watermelon seeds hadn't even reached the Central Plains yet, finding them here felt like hitting a gacha jackpot. Liu Ping noticed me staring and timidly asked, "Young Master Bai, why are you staring at me like that?" He broke out in a cold sweat under my intense gaze. Terrified he had messed something up, I simply patted his shoulder and told him he had a bright future ahead. Going from 0 to 1 with that single watermelon seed was the hardest hurdle. My grand plan was locked in: expand the population and achieve absolute food freedom. I called the Straw Hat farmers over to the crafting table while everyone else watched with envy. I quickly crafted a matching set of stone hoes and handed them out one by one. I told them to take good care of their new working tools. Instead of just carrying them, they treated those hoes like prized brides, holding them flat in front of themselves to avoid touching the dusty ground. Liu Ping clutched his tool and swore, "Rest assured, young Master Bai, this hoe is more important than my own life, and I'll fight anyone who dares touch it." I told village chief Liu Dexi, Liu Er, and Liu Ping to stay behind while dismissing the rest. Some villagers walked away heavily, while others eagerly sprinted toward the fields to practice farming for next time. Village chief Liu Er and Liu Ping stay behind. Everyone else can disperse. I instructed the village chief to find an open space near the village for wheat and bring all available coal before tonight. Torches placed around the field would accelerate crop growth through the night. I handed the wheat seeds to Liu Ping with clear instructions for tomorrow morning. They bowed politely, turned around, and beamed with wide grins as they walked away together. "Take these wheat seeds, plant them along the water source tomorrow morning, and don't touch the torches." Village chief Liu Dexi carefully asked if the cows needed to be alive. "Young Master Bai, should the cattle be alive, or are dead ones fine?" I frowned and replied, "They have to be alive. I need them to breed." He explained that the imperial court strictly regulated cattle trading, making them tough to buy. Luckily, Zhang village had an ox they could spare, and his own family had an old yellow ox to spare as well. The unremitted village taxes sitting in our hands were more than enough to cover 2 sheep. Gesturing thoughtfully, Liu Dexi confirmed, "As for the sheep, it should be no problem, and there will likely be some funds left over." I decided to put every last remaining copper coin toward iron ingots or raw ironware. All of that metal would go straight into crafting crossbows. In this world, the imperial laws were brutal on private weapons possessing. Even crossbow arrows could get you thrown in prison, exiled, or executed. Yet crossbows were worth the risk, requiring far less strength and training than bows while letting ordinary men form a lethal defense against unarmored enemies. I asked Liu Dexi, "Are there many able fighters?" Stroking his wispy goatee, he recalled, "There are still 3 or 4 capable men." I told him to have those men ready at the village entrance right after dawn tomorrow. Liu Er rushed over with wide, eager eyes and asked, "Boss, what about me? Do I have a big task?" I put on a deadpan, highly solemn face and told him, "Right now, grab some long ropes and hurry back as fast as you can." Taking the urgent mission to heart, Liu Er sprinted down the dusty village path at breakneck speed. I kicked my feet up on the crafting table and calmly bit into a fresh red apple while I waited. Before long, Liu Er came panting back through the trees with thick ropes tangled all over his body. Gasping for air, he shouted, "Boss, I'm ready, let's go. As we walked along the quiet forest path, Liu finally couldn't hold back his curiosity and asked if we were going hunting. I gave him a teasing grin and claimed I was simply afraid of the dark, and that the ropes were meant for leading chickens back so they wouldn't wander off. We also needed to fetch special water from the old source for the wheat fields. I rolled up my sleeves, struck a bodybuilding pose to show off a tiny muscle bump, and pretended to instantly grow exhausted. Drooping my shoulders, I looked at him with complete sincerity. Liu suddenly remembered the time I had carried a wolf and looked at me with deep suspicion. I quickly spun another excuse, claiming my previous strength was just the result of a short divine blessing. Falling for it completely, Liu puffed up his chest and swore to protect me as we walked toward the dirt house. My real plan was to trick any potential troublemakers by playing the weak leader. Once I outfitted Liu in leather armor, enemies would target me instead, walking right into my trap. Before we parted, I told him, "Right, Liu, come over tomorrow morning and bring your father along." He nodded with wide, curious eyes, ready for whatever lay ahead. Early the next morning before dawn, I saw Liu Ping carrying his stone hoe outside with dark circles under his eyes. Ever since getting recognition from the straw hat and receiving that magical tool from me yesterday, he had been too excited to sleep all night. Along the dim path, Liu Ping kept running into other villagers wearing straw hats. Every single one of them sported the exact same sleepless dark circles. When they reached the designated planting field, the villagers stared in total disbelief at the bright, glowing fires. A bold villager even stepped forward and cried out, "These torches are so bright." The villager reached out and tested the flame, gasping in surprise. "Hey, this fire isn't even hot." The fire acted like a tamed beast, obediently lowering its head to let everyone pet it. Liu Ping told everyone to stop playing around and stepped into the field to demonstrate proper farming. The villagers quickly divided up my wheat seeds and got straight to work. A villager laughed out loud and boasted, "Ha ha ha, you guys are way too slow." Finishing up at the field, Liu Ping hurried back home to put down his hoe. "I've already planted 5 immortal wheat seeds." Another villager immediately shouted back, "Just wait, I'm about to catch up right now." With a harvest cycle of at most 7 days, the villagers looked over the freshly planted soil with burning passion. Just imagine how much wheat they were going to get. As the strongest fighter in the village, heading into the city for this mission was naturally up to him. I ran into Liu Ping on my way over and asked about his straw hat. He grinned and told me, "Don't worry, ever since last night, I found out that whenever I think of it vanishing, it just disappears, look." Liu Ping puffed out his chest and boasted that he could easily take on 3 ordinary men. Liu Ping puffed out his chest. Liu Qi stepped forward with a polished salute and added, "Young Master Bai, this team still needs someone who can talk." I pulled some stone swords from my inventory and handed them over to test their strength. When most found them too heavy, I quickly crafted a few wooden swords and handed out leather boots. Even though they were just simple wooden swords, their edge was sharper than any ordinary iron blade. I handed over the gear with a strict warning, telling them to return promptly after shopping and bring back a scholar if possible. I needed someone to clarify the Tianqi rain year so I could gauge the timeline of the upcoming peasant uprisings and potentially unlock a librarian. I told Liu Da and the Iron Golem to stay back and handle backup duties near the world boundary. The Iron Golem couldn't step outside the world limits without vanishing entirely, so stationing it at the edge was our best bet. I watched the expedition team march off down the path. Turning around with a mysterious grin, I looked straight at Liu and asked if he had eaten breakfast. Because of year-after-year crop failures, the village had long been reduced to eating just 1 meal a day out of sheer starvation. I pulled out a long loaf of bread and cheerfully handed it to him. Liu stared blankly and took the bread, his fingers sinking into a texture as soft as a cloud. I took a bite of my own piece, noting that it tasted just like store-bought bread with a richer wheat aroma. Liu stopped talking and started stuffing the bread into his mouth in desperate silence. Hot tears streamed down his weathered face and dripped straight onto the green grass, prompting me to step over, hand him water, and gently pat his back. He wiped his face and forced an ugly, tear-stained smile while apologizing. I brushed it off and shoved my leftover half-eaten bread straight into his hands, telling him he had to eat it to give me face. Liu carefully packed the bread into his back basket to share with his younger siblings. I stowed the water bucket away, raised my arm with a grin, and declared that it was time to go on a brand new adventure. The ground tremors suddenly ceased, signaling that Tiashan had finally halted. We stood right before a stark yellow-green dividing line that cut the entire landscape in two, one side vibrant with life, the other choked in lingering death. Liu Da cast a worried glance at Liu Ping and warned him to be extremely careful on the road ahead. Liu Ping gave a resolute nod, and the team drew their blades before stepping across the boundary. Withered crops and cracked fields stretched out in every direction, punctuated by scattered human bones in the dirt. Dried riverbeds bore deep scratch marks where starving refugees had frantically clawed at the hardened mud for damp soil. Emaciated wanderers roamed the desolate fields, their muscles completely atrophied until they looked like walking mummies. One vagrant clutched a broken iron pot while his eyes burned with a desperate green hunger, locking a steady gaze on us. Massive crowds of refugees jammed the dry canal outside Cheng City, barred from entry without travel passes. A meager porridge station set up by the local gentry drew a desperate pack of outstretched bowls, though the meager rations were meant for fame rather than charity. Refugees who missed out on the meager food numbly shuffled back to their spots and lay down to conserve their dwindling energy. Liu Qi instructed 2 guards to hold their ground and watch the gear while the rest of us moved toward the gate. The guards found a quiet spot nearby and settled in to wait. Liu Qi flashed a smooth smile as he handed a fake travel pass and a few small silver pieces to the guards. The guards instantly spotted the fake pass, but they gladly pocketed the bribe for a quick profit. Pedestrians and vendors hurrying through the bustling streets of Cheng City looked gaunt and exhausted. Zhu Zi looked around at the weary crowds and muttered, "This city looks worse off than our village back home." Liu Qi sternly reminded everyone that our mission for immortal Lord Bai could not afford a single mistake. He handed silver coins to Zhu Zi for supplies before tracking down a weathered house in the city. A ragged, emaciated middle-aged man wearing long sleeves cracked open the door and eyed our rustic attire with suspicion. Liu Qi offered a polite bow and asked him to come teach children at our village in exchange for daily food and pay. Before Liu Qi could finish, the heavy wooden door slammed shut right in our faces with a loud bang. The scholar shouted bitterly from inside, "Do you think I'm easy to trick just because my family is all dead?" Liu Qi's eyes flashed with fierce resolve as he whispered a plan to knock the scholar out and drag him back by force. Before Liu Ping could even knock again, the scholar nimbly scrambled over the courtyard wall and bolted. We sprinted frantically around the narrow alley corners, but the scholar vanished down familiar shortcuts without a trace. Liu Qi and Liu Ping were forced to search Cheng City for another scholar. But every candidate they approached refused the moment they heard they would have to leave the city. They all knew how dangerous it was outside the gates, preferring to stay safe inside. One terrified man even slammed his heavy wooden door right in their faces. A furious shout suddenly echoed down the street, accusing them of causing trouble in Cheng City. Liu Qi and Liu Ping turned around in shock. A group of government runners was closing in on them. Liu Qi looked at his companion with growing anxiety. Liu Ping was a strong fighter, but he was completely unarmed. Trying to fight government runners inside the city walls would be absolute suicide. The 2 villagers had been wandering aimlessly and asking too many questions. Suspicious city dwellers and merchants whispered about their strange behavior, which eventually tipped off the guards. The runners drew their gleaming sabers and completely blocked their path. A runner named Zhao Wu sneered at them. "Once we throw you in the dungeon, I'll strip a layer of skin right off you." Liu Qi recognized 2 of the officers from the tax collection at their village the day before. He spoke up to address them. The 2 runners turned pale as chalk, instantly realizing these men were protected by me. The terrified runners began to tremble and stammered out quick excuses. They hastily cleared the way for them. Liu Qi clasped his fists in thanks and led Liu Ping quickly past the guards. Zhao Wu was furious and wanted to chase them down, but his comrades desperately held him back. They warned him that provoking me would bring divine wrath. They were terrified of being reborn as beasts in their next lives if he interfered. The runners finally convinced Zhao Wu to let the matter go. He agreed to send a message to the guards at the city gate to let the farmers pass safely. He then hurried off toward the gate. Zhu Zi was waiting at the city gate with 2 sheep laden with heavy iron farm tools. Liu Qi met up with him and reported their failure to find a scholar. He explained how they had almost been thrown into a dungeon. Zhu Zi thought about it and pointed toward the sprawling camps outside. He suggested they might find an educated man among the refugees. Liu Qi agreed that they had no other choice but to try. They approached the city gate, and Liu Qi prepared some silver coins for a bribe. The guards merely glanced at them and waved them through without demanding a single coin. Liu Qi left Liu Ping and Zhu Zi to guard the sheep and ironware. He ventured into the refugee camp alone to search. In a clearing, he spotted a broken pot boiling with a grim, bubbling red stew. He rushed to the center of the camp and shouted his offer. "Is there a scholar here? Our village needs one, and we will provide food." Starving refugees glared at him with dead eyes, clutching rusty metal pieces when he got too close. Several desperate people crawled forward claiming they could read, but Liu Qi had to drive them away. He felt a deep pang of pity for them. He pulled out his own dried salted fish and distributed them to the starving crowd. Liu Qi believed his lucky escape from the guards was my divine arrangement. He was just about to leave in despair when a weak voice called out to him, A ragged refugee leaning on a wooden staff limped forward and agreed to go with him. I pointed out various flowers to Liu and told him to gather them. Liu enthusiastically ran back and forth through the dense forest to collect them. That flower looks nice, Liu. I took the tall lilacs from Liu and gave them a sniff, finding the fragrance rich without being too sharp. I nodded in satisfaction and stored them in my inventory, planning to plant a proper garden by my front door instead of using boring wheat seeds as decoration. Liu asked with eager expectation, "Boss, what else do you want?" I told him to keep an eye out for honeycombs or mushrooms and let me know. Even without silk touch, I figured I could force a honeycomb down to get honey for consumption and sugar production. Mushrooms could be grown into giant ones with bone meal and combined with flowers into suspicious stew for quick buffs like fire resistance, regeneration, and night vision. While looking around, my eyes lit up at a tall tree. I excitedly told Liu to stop, and he spotted a bird's nest with several eggs high in the branches. Liu offered to climb up for the eggs, but I stopped him with a wave. I did some warm-up stretches, rolled up my sleeves, and said, "Let me do it. I've never raided a bird's nest before." I reached the branch fork and grabbed the bird's eggs. With my old-world vision cleared up, the scenery looked incredible, and I called Liu up to join me. Liu nimbly scrambled up the tree trunk with ease. I tossed him an apple from my inventory, and we leaned against the forks to eat. I relaxed against a branch, humming Jay-Cho's rice field while tapping a rhythm on my thigh. Liu stared at my profile, marveling at the clean water, good food, and slow, peaceful time. I noticed him staring and teased, "Liu, why are you staring at me like that? Is there a flower on my face?" He grinned and asked if celestial fairies chased after such a handsome boss. I gave him a confident thumbs up at the praise. Right behind him, a yellow object flickered under the leaves. It was the honeycomb I wanted. Liu finished his apple and scampered down the tree instantly. That left me stranded alone on the branch, realizing going down was much harder than climbing up. Remembering game logic, I pulled out my water bucket and took a deep breath. I placed water right at my feet just in time, successfully pulling off an MLG water landing. I handed the bird's eggs to Liu to wrap in cloth and put in his basket. "Over this way," I said. I spotted a honeycomb. We found a natural block-shaped honeycomb hanging from an oak tree with honey dripping down. Half-meter-long bees buzzed around it, and Liu remarked, "Such big bees, but why are they so cute?" I placed a campfire beneath the honeycomb and tried to pull it down. It was bolted to the air like solid block data, forcing me to realize I'd need shears next time. I gave a helpless shrug and asked, "Liu, did you remember this path?" He nodded and pointed out a red mushroom nearby. Liu eagerly ran over and picked the red mushroom for me. We looked for brown ones too, but came up empty-handed. "Today's haul is fantastic. We had fun. Truly great." I put away the red mushroom and told Liu it was time to head back. I wondered how Liu Qi was holding up back at the village. With Tiashan guarding the place, any attacking bandits wouldn't even scratch his solid iron feet. I frowned as I looked over at the haggard young scholar and his companion. Liu Qi crossed his arms and questioned Miao Ming, asking, "You're saying you'll only come with us if you bring this guy along?" Miao Ming cupped his hands and gave a firm reply, stating, "He's my sworn brother and bodyguard who's protected me this far, and he's skilled with a long spear." I inspected the bearded giant more closely, noting his hollow cheeks and thin frame contrasted sharply with his broad shoulders, sharp gaze, and thick calloused fists. I broke the silence by asking point blank, "Can he farm?" Miao Ming offered an awkward smile and replied, "He doesn't know how right now, but he can learn." After weighing the pros and cons, I gave a nod and said, "All right, let's move out." As we turned to leave, Wei Shi murmured to Miao Ming, "Boss, are you really sure about this? There's no turning back once we follow them." Miao Ming managed a bitter smile, figuring they were dead either way and might as well take a gamble. Wei Shi shook his head and replied with fierce loyalty, saying that with the scholar's brains, they would surely carve out a place in the stronghold. Miao Ming kept replaying his earlier observations in his head, noting how these villagers looked far healthier than city folk. Ordinary villages had no business buying massive piles of ironware and livestock, leading him to conclude we were running a mountain stronghold planning a rebellion. What finally sealed his decision was watching me share actual meat and dried fish with starving refugees. That proved to him that our food supplies were genuinely solid. When we got back, I immediately noticed something felt off in the camp. The surrounding refugees were slowly creeping inward, while Liu Ping and the guards stood tense and grim, clutching their sword hilts. Sensing the immediate danger, I barked the order, "Move out!" A small faction of hostile refugees trailed closely behind us, swelling into a massive crowd of wandering, starving people as we put distance between ourselves and the city. I pulled out most of our remaining salted fish slices and handed them over to keep our new recruits going. Miao Ming was so weak from prolonged starvation that his hands shook violently just trying to hold the food. Wei Shi gently took the fish and split it in two for him. Miao Ming pushed the larger piece right back, telling him, "You need to keep your strength up so we can survive if those refugees attack." Miao Ming anxiously asked how many reinforcements were coming to cover us. I waved my hands in a hurry and said, "Who said anything about rebelling? The Immortal Lord just told us to find a scholar." Miao Ming clutched his head in absolute despair as his grand illusion of joining anti-court rebels completely shattered. He realized our whole operation was just a scam run under the guise of an immortal. Liu Ping grinned and shouted over his shoulder, "We're almost there." Miao Ming froze in utter disbelief at the sight waiting for him at the end of the road. In the distance lay a lush primeval forest that stood in bizarre contrast to the surrounding withered wasteland, looking as though it were artificially embedded into the world. I couldn't help wondering how plants managed to grow when it hadn't rained for months, and even the river had dried up. A sudden disturbance broke out in the refugee group trailing behind us. Liu Ping and the guards instantly raised their swords in strict vigilance. The crowd parted to reveal a scarred, gaunt man stepping forward. His long, thin fingers curved like eagle talons, and a sinister smirk hung on his lips. The scarred man spoke in a harsh, raspy voice that grated on our nerves. "You have 2 sheep. Just give us one, and we'll leave right away." Miao Ming felt his stomach tighten with anxiety at the extortion. He knew handing over a sheep would only trigger endless demands like wolves smelling blood. Yet he lacked the authority to make decisions. Seeing Liu Qi hesitate, the scarred man forced out fake tears and dropped to his knees. He crawled forward while kowtowing, pleading, "My lord, please. We used to be ordinary people before the drought." Miao Ming noticed the man getting far too close and shouted a frantic warning. Before the attacker could land a hidden blade strike, Wei Shi delivered a heavy punch to his abdomen and knocked him cold. The refugee crowd erupted into frantic chaos and used the moment to incite a violent robbery. Starving and frail, they stumbled forward with jagged weapon shards like a horde of zombies. Liu Qi turned to Miao Ming with a grim expression. "Take these things and escape first." Zhu Zi swallowed hard and asked Wei Shi if he knew how to use a sword. He quickly stripped off his leather boots and handed them along with the wooden sword over, saying, "These are wasted on me." Wei Shi tried to squeeze into the small boots, but something impossible happened. They magically expanded and wrapped firmly around his large feet. Liu Qi explained that the items were protective magical artifacts left by Immortal Lord Bai. Zhu Zi put on a brave laugh, even though his legs were shaking uncontrollably. Zhu Zi picked up the dropped broken blade and immediately gagged in absolute disgust. The blade was smeared with disgusting night soil. Miao Ming ran desperately towards safety with blood dripping from his bitten tongue. He forced himself through the blinding exhaustion to keep moving. He gasped out a final warning as he reached safety, crying out, "Hurry back and save them." Liu Da rushed forward to catch his collapsing body before he hit the dirt. The ground shook violently as Tieshan stood up from where he sat. His eyes flared with deep ruby-red light as he realized the villagers he guarded were under attack. Tieshan broke into an unstoppable, furious sprint across the landscape. His massive iron frame was engulfed in a blazing crimson aura as he rushed to the rescue. Wei Shi swung his sword to cut down an approaching starving refugee in the chaotic fray. He spun around immediately to deliver a fierce kick to another attacker trying to blindside Zhu Zi, sending the man crashing heavily to the dusty ground. Zhu Zi panted heavily with dry, cracked lips, completely drained of the strength to speak. He exchanged a grateful, silent nod with Wei Shi while the relentless horde of starving refugees bypassed the main fighters to surge directly toward Miao Ming. Zhu Zi felt a heavy pang of guilt looking at the tattered clothes of Liu Qi's group, especially Wei Shi, who was nearly bare-chested. Because Zhu Zi had handed over his boots and wooden sword, the defenders loosely guarded him in the center while holding the perimeter. Faint protective magical glows rippled across the fighters' gear as Immortal Lord Bai's artifacts shielded them from fatal strikes. Without those gifts, the defenders would have collapsed long ago under the endless wave of attackers. Stamina had already hit rock bottom while the group remained completely surrounded on all sides. Just then, an even more desperate thing happened as the magical leather boots burst apart and vanished into thin air. The surrounding mob of starving refugees broke into manic, bloodthirsty laughter. They jeered wildly, shouting, "We'll make you pay with your lives and eat you alive." Wei Shi gritted his teeth with grim determination as he prepared for a desperate charge. Liu Qi rasped out his agreement without hesitation, saying, "Do it." Wei Shi looked at Liu Qi with a serious gaze and told him, "Take good care of my young master." He secretly wondered with a chuckle if Miao Ming would wake up and cry in the corner like he did as a child. Roaring, "Kill!" Wei Shi squeezed out his last drop of strength and charged straight into the enemy weapons. Suddenly the ground began shaking violently and a severe tremor forcefully knocked him down to the trembling earth. Panic erupted as the starving refugees scrambled away, screaming, "Monster! Don't kill me. Run. A 3-meter-tall, blood-drenched iron golem glowing with red light swung its long arms at blinding speed, flinging fallen attackers into the air like broken dolls. Seeing the miserable state of Liu Qi's group, Tieshan grew truly enraged and showed no mercy to the attackers. Terrified by the sheer scale of the threat, Wei Shi shouted to Liu Qi and the others. Run! Hurry up and run! Zhu Zi collapsed to the ground in relief, pointing admiringly at the towering figure and crying out. That is Tieshan, the divine general under immortal Lord Bai. The savage refugees were easily wiped out, leaving Tieshan to turn its cold red gaze toward Wei Shi and the wooden sword in his hand. Staring into those cold red eyes, Wei Shi lost all strength in his hands and watched the wooden sword slip away as he collapsed. Zhu Zi quickly called out, Divine General Tieshan. He's with us. Tieshan nodded and walked toward Liu Qi's group, though its blood-covered appearance still made them slightly fearful. Noticing their hesitation, the golem conjured bright red poppies in its hand and gently distributed them as a gesture of goodwill, though it directly bypassed Wei Shi. Liu Qi keenly noticed that Tieshan's once smooth iron body had developed fine cracks beneath the bloodstains. When Liu Qi asked if it intended to escort them back, the golem nodded firmly, clearly not trusting the villagers out of its sight. Liu Qi told Wei Shi it was time to meet immortal Lord Bai. Wei Shi swallowed nervously, completely awestruck by how unfathomably powerful the master of such a divine general must be. I returned to Lu village and found Lu Dexi waiting at the entrance with a man from Zhang village. Both of them stood quietly beside 2 tethered cows. I recognized the visitor as the bold, hearty uncle from Zhang village who had navigated my way here before. Liu Dexi patted the nervous man on the shoulder and smiled. He told him not to worry because immortal Lord Bai didn't eat people. Zhang Juyi nervously kneaded the rope in his hands and muttered that he understood. Escorting me had accidentally turned him into a local celebrity back home, leading his fellow villagers to push him forward as their representative. Liu Dexi straightened up and whispered a quick warning that I was approaching. I walked up alongside Lu and smiled a cheerful greeting. Zhang Juyi lost all his former boldness and bowed deeply, apologizing for his past lack of propriety. Young Master Bai saved everyone in Zhang village, so we offer this cow as repayment, he said. Seeing the once hearty man tremble with such excessive reverence made my smile stiffen into an awkward grimace. I let out a quiet sigh before asking, what do you want in return? Zhang Juyi waved his hands in delighted refusal and replied, Your grace is beyond repayment, so we only ask for permission to fetch water from Lu village. I nodded my approval and told them they could head back now. I instructed Lu to take the cow and keep it. Raising livestock brought a mountain of annoying chores like feeding and walking, but I figured I had no choice. Liu nodded eagerly and stepped forward to take hold of the lead rope. Liu Dexi lingered behind without moving, prompting me to ask, Is there anything else? Liu Dexi spoke in a cautious whisper. Wang and Wang village are starting an uprising because tax collectors robbed their seed grain and tried to arrest them. I stared in sheer disbelief at the extreme stupidity of those Cheng City officials. Robbing farmers of their seed grain in a famine was pure suicide. And it meant late dynastic peasant uprisings were finally erupting. I shook my head and declared, We are not getting involved in this. Liu village was still developing its defenses, and clashing with the imperial court over starving farmers was far too risky. Liu Dexi let out a profound sigh of relief. As long as our own people had food and water, staying out of the brewing civil conflict was the safest bet of all. Zhang Juyi departed with a beaming smile and a pounding heart after successfully completing his mission. I watched him leave and left Lu in charge of our newest farmhand. I looked out over the village with an unimpressed grimace. Everything they had came from me, while that useless emperor in the capital never provided a single bite of food. I asked Liu Dexi when Wang and the others planned to start their uprising. He replied, Tomorrow, though they haven't set a specific hour. It was a golden opportunity to recruit skilled craftsmen like blacksmiths and carpenters. But my village lacked anyone agile enough for city operations. I rubbed my temples, lamenting our severe shortage of capable fighters. While waiting for Liu Qi's group to return, I decided to test growing a giant mushroom. I called Lu over, poured a water bucket next to my house, and tried the old planting method only to fail completely. I dug a 2-block hole and sealed the top with dirt to create total pitch-black darkness. In that enclosed space, the red mushroom planted successfully, and I climbed back out with a grin. I told Liu to stand back and applied bone meal, instantly erupting a giant red mushroom that enclosed me. Liu called out from outside with a worried voice, Boss, are you okay? Liu quickly carved an opening through the mushroom wall, and I popped out with a proud grin. He stared in absolute awe, asking, Can I touch it? I've never seen anything this big. Growing it had cost 4 units of bone meal instead of 1, but I had plenty to spare. That spark of inspiration hit me. Farmers could use this to build portable shelters and food sources everywhere. I pointed eagerly toward the settlement and called out, Liu, go into the village and bring back a villager wearing a straw hat. Liu dropped everything and bolted toward the village at blinding speed. I watched him kick up dust and smiled at how fast he was getting. I planted another mushroom in a pit and used a crafting table to forge a stone shovel. It was time to test if villagers could handle the digging and planting. Subtle vibrations rippled through the earth beneath my feet. Taishan was finally coming back with the iron tools we needed for crossbows. My good mood vanished the moment I saw them stagger into view. Taishan's massive iron frame was covered in deep cracks, and Liu Ping and the other villagers returned with tattered clothes and bleeding wounds. A sudden, overwhelming fury gripped me, and the sky instantly shattered into a violent storm. Torrential rain poured down as jagged lightning tore across the heavens. Frightened animals fled toward the edge of the world, while villagers in Zhang Village stared in absolute terror at the raging tempest over our territory. Inside the world, a lush green forest bloomed with colorful, fragrant flowers, completely unlike the dead silence outside. Busy bees collected nectar, white chicks wandered freely, and wild rabbits hid among the overgrown grass. Every time Tiashan stepped down, rustling sounds from the trees startled flocks of birds into a spin. I gazed around in amazement at the magical world. This was the power of the immortal lord, and my young master was finally saved. Miao Juming was unconscious and cradled like an infant in Tiashan's arms. I worried over my master's weak, starving condition after our desperate run. Anxious, I asked, how much longer until we reach the village? Liu Qi reassured me, saying, don't worry, the immortal lord is a benevolent god who is very gentle. Your young master is a scholar, so he won't give you a hard time. Liu Ping pointed to the distant village and told me that was their home. I finally let out a long breath of relief. Then I noticed a square straw hat resting on Liu Ping's head. He proudly boasted that the immortal lord had bestowed it upon him as the first in the village. Liu Ping carelessly reached to touch his hat and accidentally aggravated his wound. Frowning slightly, I stood nearby in speechless silence. Liu Qi told him, first deliver these iron tools to the immortal lord before you go showing off that hat. Liu Ping defended himself, claiming, second brother, I'm just using it to block the glaring sun. Zhuzi asked in confusion, why did the sky suddenly turn dark? Instantly, thick storm clouds with weaving lightning replaced the clear sky as heavy raindrops slammed down violently. Taishan stepped behind the group and leaned forward to shelter them under his massive iron body. Liu Qi and the others quickly cupped their fists, shouting, thank you, Divine General. Taishan knew the scholar in his arms was needed by his master and had to be protected just like the villagers. Noticing me standing out in the rain, Tiashan considered me harmless and helpful. I instinctively stepped back when he reached out, before realizing the Divine General just wanted to shelter me. Making eye contact, I hesitated and said, thank you. Divine General Tishan. Tishan blinked, patted my head, and handed me a red poppy flower. I shouted loudly in complaint, how did this rain start so suddenly when it was clear a second ago? I completely failed to notice the pale, terrified expressions of Liu Qi, Liu Ping, and Zhu Zi. Before I could finish, Liu Qi stopped me in a panic and muttered, it's the immortal lord. The villagers recalled tales of world-shattering divine power and wondered if the immortal lord was angry at them. As the figure drew close, we saw immortal Lord Bai standing in the pouring rain, untouched by the howling wind and torrents. Under their terrified gaze, I asked, who beat you up like this? My tone was calm and peaceful, but the apocalyptic sky behind me revealed my true wrath. Under the intense pressure, Liu Qi, Zhu Zi, and the others promptly dropped to their knees, burying their heads in the damp soil. Terrified at meeting a true immortal, I swallowed hard and cowered behind Liu Qi, even envying my unconscious young master. I cast a helpless, innocent glance at Liu Qi. So much for the immortal lord being gentle. This was pure deception for honest folks. Liu Qi bit his tongue hard to snap himself out of the sheer panic. Then hurriedly reporting to the immortal lord. We ran into an overwhelming horde of refugees on the road. We were completely surrounded until Divine General Tishan arrived just in time to save our lives. I demanded to know, where are those refugees now? Liu Qi stammered back. They're dead, seeing the iron golem live up to its name by leaving none of them alive. My roaring anger finally began to fade. Wait, how could ordinary refugees crack Tiashan's iron body? It probably happened when the iron head blindly charged out before the villagers even crossed over into my world. I looked at the blank iron face and instructed, Taishan, if there's a lake and someone falls in, don't rush to save them yourself, go call the others instead. Understand? Overhead, the violent thunder finally stopped as a gentle drizzle began to fall. Liu Qi carefully reported, Immortal Lord, the divine boots you gave us have completely dissolved. I waved it off, saying, protective gear is meant to break. Don't worry about it. Besides, you brought back plenty of iron, sheep, and even an unconscious scholar. You did well. Looking at the drenched villagers, I pulled a massive stack of roasted fish from my inventory. Split these up and eat them right now until you can't possibly swallow another bite. In this world, filling the hunger bar with food handcrafted by me actually restores health. The villagers happily devoured the steaming fish on their walk back. Zhu Zi finished eating first and gasped as his wounds rapidly scabbed over and healed. My wound is itching so much. It's already closing up. Is this divine fish meat? After settling everyone down, I led the group to my half-built cabin where Liu Wusan, and village chief Liu Dexi were quietly waiting. Liu asked with deep concern, "Boss, are you all right? Is the mortal realm still rejecting you?" I shook my head and told him to go bring over a cow instead. I emptied a wooden water bucket and milked a fresh batch right from the cow. Then I motioned for Teshan to carry the unconscious refugee over. A foul stench hit my nose the moment they approached, making me pinch my nose in disgust. I told Teshan to put him down gently and handed over the bucket, ordering, "Go ahead, feed all of this milk to him." Even with a nose bigger than mine, how could the iron golem not smell that garbage dump odor? The refugee's complexion began to stabilize nicely. My future chief librarian was finally safe, and I had scored an unexpected bonus. I turned my gaze to Wei Shi, realizing his high combat stats made him perfect for what I needed next. Wei Shi dropped to one knee with cupped hands and swore, "Young master, I will gladly brave fire and water for you without hesitation." I told Wei Shi and Lu Ping to infiltrate Cheng City during tomorrow's uprising and bring back a carpenter, blacksmith, and doctor using special tokens. Since Miao Zhuming needed a proper place to rest while unconscious, I called Liu Wusan over to test building a mushroom house. Liu Wusan jumped when I called his name. He nervously stepped forward to ask what I needed. I handed him several flat plates of bone meal and told him to stand on the higher ledge inside the trench. I had dug an extra block down beside the pit to make it trapezoidal. This would keep the villagers from getting stuck when the red mushrooms spawn. Liu Wusan stood inside the pit holding the bone meal while I warned him to stay calm, keep his head back, and curl his body up tight. A massive red mushroom house instantly erupted from the ground. My dream of building a mushroom town was finally becoming a reality. I was thrilled by the success. I ordered Tiashan to slowly carve out a doorway that was 2 meters high and 1 meter wide. He had to be extremely careful not to hurt anyone inside. Liu Wusan crawled safely out of the newly carved opening. I opened up my crafting table to make a wooden door and a signpost. I threw the miniature wooden door toward the opening. It instantly expanded in midair and locked firmly into the frame. This door would remain standing even if the mushroom walls themselves disappeared. I mounted the signpost onto the exterior wall. I engraved the words "Mushroom Town Room Number 1 by Lee Limited Edition" onto the wood with a quick thought. I clapped my hands in satisfaction, already imagining how much this property would appreciate. I turned to Wei Shi and told him that this house belonged to him and his master now. Wei Shi stared at the red mushroom house. His nose stung and tears welled up in his eyes. A fearless bodyguard like him was deeply moved to finally have a real home. Wei Shi dropped to his knees and kowtowed 3 times to swear his absolute loyalty to me. I accepted his oath and told him to get some rest under Tiashan's protection. He needed to recover his strength for tomorrow's work. I instructed village chief Liu Dexi to arrange food, hot showers, and clean clothes for the newcomers. Liu Dexi respectfully agreed and led Wei Shi away to begin their fresh start. I watched the villagers use shovels to dig up dirt. They could carve out perfect 1 cubic meter blocks, and a single tap from me would shrink the blocks so they flew straight into my inventory. Liu Wusan used a wooden stick to push one of the solid dirt blocks. This confirmed that the blocks they dug were physical entities. I also noted that the mushrooms would need absolute darkness to grow properly. I tried to summon a storm by faking anger, but nothing happened. I even tried to summon real rage by remembering the time my food deliveries were stolen. But the sky remained stubbornly clear. I gave up on exploiting weather bugs to fish for treasure. It was time to focus on crafting crossbows from the scrap iron I had collected. I molded the soft scrap iron into the shape of iron ingots by hand. Placing them on the crafting table allowed me to break them down into iron nuggets. I sorted my iron ingots into separate piles. 2 were reserved for shears, 2 were set aside to repair Tiashan, and the remaining 6 were designated for crafting crossbows. I crafted tripwire hooks first. Then I placed them in the center of the crafting table with string on both sides and sticks below to successfully craft a crossbow. I loaded a simple wooden stick into the crossbow and fired it. The stick flew out and pierced deep into a nearby tree trunk, meaning I didn't need to craft standard arrows to use it. I decided to equip the villagers with these weapons for training, and then I would expand my farm now that we had cows, sheep, and chickens. I led the 2 sheep behind my unfinished wooden hut and temporarily penned them with the cows and chickens. Then I crafted enough wooden fences to divide the space into 3 symmetrical enclosures. leaving one empty for later. After feeding the cows and sheep with wheat, I took wheat seeds over to the chicken pen and found the ground practically covered in eggs. I collected every single egg into my inventory and smashed them straight onto the dirt. They didn't break into a messy puddle of yolk. Each egg instantly hatched into a fluffy newborn chick. I fed the adult chickens again and felt a strong sense of accomplishment watching the little chicks wander around. Once I had enough chickens, I figured I would just have villagers collect the eggs for me. Then it suddenly hit me, if I remembered the latest game version, right? Pandas were added to the game. I grabbed a water bucket and shoved my entire head straight into it, watching air bubbles pop up at the bottom of my vision to cool off. My master plan was clear. I would dig a river for fishing and pandas, plant a bamboo forest, and lure those pandas straight into my house to lock them up. I wasn't too worried about whether animals would respawn, since the wild beehive already proved that Minecraft creatures naturally refreshed here. Monsters still hadn't shown up yet, which made me guess I must be playing on peaceful mode. My mind suddenly conjured up a terrifying siege scenario with skeletons firing arrows, creepers blasting down the gates, and armored zombies storming the walls. My current setup really felt like a bizarre, rule-bound horror game, even if it was completely harmless for now. I didn't need to dig the river myself. I could just have the farmers use shovels and make Tiashan haul away the solid dirt blocks. Dusk was falling fast as I finished breeding the cows with wheat and headed over to the sheep pen. I pulled out my shears and clipped the wool right off the sheep. The sheep stared back with that familiar, blank, empty-headed look. I fed wheat to the baby lamb to speed up its growth, because I was still one block of wool short of making a bed. Liu Wu-san put on the only outfit he saved for the new year, spun around, and anxiously asked his wife if he looked too casual. She looked at her excited husband with total affection and reassured him that he looked great. A child peeked through the doorframe and asked, "Dad, why are you going out so late?" His wife smiled warmly and answered, "Immortal Lord Bai sent for your dad to handle something important." The boy stared in pure admiration and vowed that he would grow up to be summoned by Immortal Lord Bai just like his dad. Liu Wu-san happily hoisted his son into the air, spun him around, and kissed both his cheeks before setting him down. Liu Wu-san walked away with a cool swagger. But the second he rounded the corner, he leaned against the wall and clutched his wildly pounding heart. Taishan spotted him during its village patrol and quietly walked over to provide an escort. Liu Wu-san offered a grateful bow and thanked Divine General Tia Shan before continuing on. I stood waiting under the moonlight and gave him a simple greeting. "You're here?" Liu Wu-san approached me with a respectful bow and greeted. "Greetings, young Master Bai." I waved away the formalities and handed him a red mushroom to get started. He tried planting it right under the bright moonlight, but it failed instantly. Panic flickered across his face as he looked at me for answers, and I told him to block the light and try again. The moment he cast a shadow over the spot, he shouted happily, "Young Master Bai, it worked." I nodded in satisfaction and told him to use some bone meal to speed up the growth. Because it was planted on flat ground, the base stayed open instead of sealing into a full giant cap. A wooden axe wouldn't work here, but a wooden shovel dug out a small red mushroom while draining his stamina. I had him shovel away the oversized mushrooms that couldn't form houses. The harvested red mushrooms went straight into the rectangular pits I had dug out for our planned town layout. I stopped him just as he reached for a fourth plot. His pale, exhausted face showed he was pushing way past his limits with the bone meal. I sent him home for the day, but gave him a critical test assignment. He had to boil some caps, eat them under family watch for 2 days, and report back immediately if anything went wrong. Liu Wu-san acknowledged the order with a weary reply and gathered the mushroom caps to take home. I walked back to my cabin while mulling over the necessity of this toxicity test. A village doctor was going to be essential soon, because milk could only provide temporary relief against ongoing debuffs like hunger weakness. I shook my head with a chuckle, briefly regretting that I hadn't kept the tax collector who got sent flying earlier to act as our doctor. A glance upward revealed a breathtaking, starry night sky stretching across the dark expanse. Listening to the cicadas and the wind, I wondered if a full inventory of blocks would ever be enough to build a staircase up into space. Realizing physical rules here were flexible, I ran over to the empty fish pond by my house. I emptied an old water bottle, clamped the opening in my teeth, and dived underwater. My UI showed no air bubbles dropping at all. I surfaced and dismissed my wild thought of spending days chopping wood to reach the stars. Expanding the village mattered more right now, though keeping a door handy for future deep-sea diving proved this experiment was still a win. I tucked the empty water bottle back into my inventory, suddenly remembering how valuable pure transparent glass was in this era. It felt oddly like a mix of Travel Frog and SimCity, and I couldn't help laughing at my own setup. I smiled peacefully as I looked over the quiet village and its scattered mushroom houses under the moonlight. There was plenty of time for all of it. Inside Ancient Herb Hall in Cheng City, I watched Ji Mingji finish taking a patient's pulse and tell him, Open your mouth. Ji Mingji examined the patient's tongue coating and offered a reassuring diagnosis. He told him, "Your symptoms look like a cold, evil affliction causing spleen and stomach imbalance. But it is nothing serious. Take this prescription and you will recover in a few days." Ji Mingji swiftly brushed down the herbal formula and handed the slip to his son Ji Xing'an. He told him to get the medicine ready for the waiting patient. Ji Xing'an wrapped up the herbs while Ji Mingji comforted the worried visitor by telling him, "Don't worry, this medicine is cheap, just a few copper cash." Once the hall cleared out, a weary Ji Mingji rubbed his swollen eyes and vented his frustration. He muttered, "More and more people get stomach ailments every day. And those herbs only treat the symptoms. Is the imperial court really planning to do nothing at all?" Ji Xing'an sneered that any disaster relief funds were mostly pocketed by corrupt officials before reaching ordinary people. He lowered his voice to add that the county magistrate kept sending men out to make arrests, leaving unending screams echoing inside the yamen, while Ji Mingji warned that rising bandits meant their peaceful days had come to an end. The heavy doors swung open to reveal a fully armed, bearded visitor wearing leather gear from head to toe. This was Wei Shi, and Ji Mingji watched him with guarded caution as the man stepped inside. Ji Mingji used his medical training to size up the stranger, noticing his strange ruddy complexion despite a thin frame. Wei Shi cupped his fists and declared, "I heard Elder Ji is a master of medicine, and I happen to possess a divine remedy that can regrow bones and revive the dead." Ji Xing'an gave the big man a skeptical look, asking, "Are you sure you aren't joking?" Without a word, Wei Shi stripped off his leather gear, drew a small knife, and slashed a long, bloody cut straight down his own forearm. Ji Mingji panicked and rushed forward, shouting, "Wait! Warrior, why do this?" "Ji Xing'an, go get medicine." Wei Shi calmly stopped him, pulled out a dried fish to fill his stomach, and then produced an apple. As Wei Shi took a bite of the apple, the deep cut on his arm closed up and shed its scab at a terrifying speed. Ji Mingji grabbed the man's arm in sheer disbelief, staring wildly at the smooth, unblemished skin left behind. Ji Mingji waved his hands frantically and cried out, "Stop! I believe you! I believe you!" He stared at the half-eaten golden apple with a heartbroken expression, mourning the wasted miraculous fruit. Wei Shi leaned in close and asked, "What if I told you there is a divine medicine that can cure all diseases in the world?" Ji Mingji took a sharp breath and asked with trembling hope, "Can it cure the plague?" To which Wei Shi answered, "Yes." Without another moment of hesitation, Ji Mingji vowed, "I'll give you everything I have, my shop and this old life of mine. Just tell me where this medicine is." Wei Shi smiled respectfully and extended his invitation. "Elder, the Immortal Lord invites you." I watched Ji Mingji freeze at the mention of the Immortal Lord. A wild thought flashing through his mind, he stammered out, "Could that person be?" and shakily raised a bent finger to point toward the sky. Wei Shi gave a respectful, confirming nod in response. That simple gesture felt like a thunderclap hitting Ji Mingji's mind, leaving him utterly overwhelmed by the realization that immortals had truly descended. A few silent tears slipped down Ji Mingji's wrinkled face as he thought of the ordinary people finally having a savior. He quickly brushed them away and regained his composure, while Wei Shi shook his head and told him to simply call him Wei Shi. Ji Mingji eagerly asked if they could set off immediately to meet the Immortal Lord. Wei Shi held up a hand and explained that they had to wait because Wang Er and the others were planning an uprising to breach the city gate. Wei Shi stated firmly, "This city is bound to fall. This is the Immortal Lord's decree." Ji Mingji listened with a heavy heart, silently wondering why the Immortal Lord would allow an attack that placed innocent commoners in such grave danger. Wei Shi explained that immortals and mortals exist in entirely different realms. He told him that mortal worldly dust suppresses divine power, which was why the Immortal Lord could only manage to extend his protection to a single village for now. Ji Mingzhi asked whether the Immortal Lord had specifically named him. Wei Shi clarified, "The Immortal Lord only asked me to bring back a doctor. But he also said your family may come along as well." Ji Mingzhi turned to his son and told him to take the children and leave with Wei Shi. Ji Xing'an anxiously grabbed his father's arm, urging him to abandon the dangerous pharmacy and seek safety under the Immortal's protection. Ji Mingzhi shook his head and pointed to the large benevolent scroll hanging on the pharmacy wall. He declared that if he left, the ordinary people of Cheng City would have nowhere left to turn for medical help. Ji Mingzhi reasoned that sending Ji Xing'an away would keep his wife and child safe from harm. He asked his son to go ahead and find out what the legendary divine medicine actually was. Wei Shi gathered Ji Xing'an's family alongside Liu Qi, who brought the recruited craftsmen, and Zhu Zi, who pushed a cart loaded with iron tools and paper. The entire group hid together inside a quiet alley to wait for the right moment. Sounds of chaos and frantic door slamming echoed through the streets as panicked residents tried to hide. Wang Er burst into the county city at the head of the rebels, shouting for everyone to kill the magistrate and open the granaries. Wei Shi led the group out of the alley at a run, pushing their supply cart through the empty streets. They reached the city walls and found the heavy gates standing wide open with no guards in sight. Hungry refugees gathered at the gate took one look at the cart filled with iron and paper and quickly looked away. Fearing the group might be connected to the rebels, the crowd simply stepped aside and let them pass. Liu village members were waiting outside the gates to receive them. I had sent every available fighter from the village to ensure the escape went smoothly. The villagers cheered in relief at having completed the Immortal Lord's mission successfully. The recruited craftsmen, however, stared ahead with anxious faces, knowing there was no turning back now that they were branded as rebels. I woke up dazed inside a completely unfamiliar environment, lying in what looked like a giant mushroom house. I remembered joining a rebel faction whose leader turned out to be a complete fraud, sending only a divine general named Tie Shan to receive me and leaving me to risk my life for rescue until I passed out. I looked around at the strange room and wondered why there was a giant pillar right down the middle. He found a small flower in his hand, hesitantly tossed it away, and felt relieved that Tie Shan was nowhere in sight before pressing against the soft, spongy walls. He stepped outside and stared up in utter shock, realizing his dwelling was actually a giant red mushroom surrounded by several others. A wooden plaque hanging on the door read, "Mushroom Town Room Number 1 Limited Edition," leaving him wondering what kind of place this was. He rubbed his eyes in disbelief, hoping the bizarre scene would change. He gritted his teeth and slapped his own face hard, wincing as the sharp sting proved this was no illusion. He walked over to a nearby village that looked normal at first glance. He cupped his hands and shouted into the silent air, but got no response. Walking deeper into the village, he found every single house completely covered in rows of hanging, half-meter-long identical dried fish. He held his head in a panic as he remembered the severe drought. All the rivers had completely dried up, so he couldn't understand where all this fish came from or where anyone even found water to fish. He swallowed hard and broke out in a cold sweat, thoroughly spooked by the bizarre sights. He pressed his back against a weathered mud wall and carefully sneaked forward when he heard people moving around. He carefully peeked around the corner to check out the source of the noise. A group of villagers in straw hats stood completely still in a prayer stance, eyes closed and shovels in hand. Tie Shan lifted a massive square dirt block onto wooden sticks and poured water from a bucket into a pit. Nearby villagers worked together to push dirt blocks forward while laying wooden rollers underneath. A large wooden platform nearby was piled high with steaming roasted fish. The Straw Hat villagers occasionally walked over to grab a bite of fish before immediately returning to their mechanical work. He avoided the busy villagers and walked over to an unfinished small wooden house. The entire structure was built from stacked wooden blocks with zero adhesive between them, showcasing a genius construction method. He looked past a rustic wooden fence into an open clearing by the water. A young gentleman in fine, expensive clothing stood leisurely casting a fishing line with a scholar's demeanor. He realized that being able to provide fish, water, and strange creatures during a severe drought proved this person was truly an extraordinary master. He wondered if waking up here was a test set up for him. While mentally wondering where Wei Shi had gone, he steeled his nerves, stepped up to within a few paces of me, and cupped his hands in a deep bow. He called out, "I am Miaoji Ming. Thank you for your life-saving grace." I patted the bench next to me and invited Miaoji Ming to sit down for some fishing. "It's a small matter. Come sit and keep me company while I fish." "My name is Bai Li," I told him. Miaoji Ming looked completely restrained as he walked forward, acutely aware of his disheveled state. He chose a spot a full pace away from me before sitting down. He stared fixedly at the empty water pool and the hookless fishing line, casting quick, furtive glances at me. He was burning with curiosity, yet far too terrified to ask. I turned my head with a faint smile and asked him point blank, "Since you walked all the way here, you must have seen the village. What do you think of it?" He mentally compared the thriving scene to Tao Yuan Ming's peach blossom spring, praising the abundance of food and peace. He then asked me with a probing look if I knew any officials, and I simply shook my head in response. Miao Zhiming painted a grim picture of the outside world, mentioning that Jurchen invaders had laid siege to Jinzhou on May 11th. He warned that natural disasters and rising bandits meant the empire would surely descend into complete chaos within a few years. He shrewdly guessed that my purchase of iron tools stemmed from anticipating future conflicts between officials and bandits. He laid out a neat two-point proposal for the village. First, troop training, and second, strict administration under my protection. I listened quietly, secretly marveling at how articulate he was compared to a college student like me. I realized village chief Lu Dexi was doing fine for now, but his lack of literacy would cause major errors once the village population grew. I kept a straight face and claimed his thoughts matched my own. "Not bad, you've passed my test. Village administration is yours for now," I declared, I noticed his dull, lifeless gaze and decided I needed to spark some life back into him. My fishing rod twitched at that exact moment, and I yanked it up as a large fish flew out and turned into golden light, entering my body. Miao Ming stared with wide, wandering eyes, completely dazed by the supernatural fishing method right in front of him. I led him over to the chicken coop and tossed in some wheat seeds for the bustling chicks. He watched the miraculous creation of life with absolute awe, realizing it was true divine power at work. I pointed at the coop and explained how self-sustaining livestock would solve hunger and earn him a place in history. He asked with sudden courage what would happen if I ever left. And I reassured him, I'll always be here. I smiled and offered a warm invitation to join me in building a world free from hunger. He finally understood why his mother prayed to deities every day, and found his own unwavering faith in me right then and there. He dropped to his knees with fierce determination in his eyes and swore to give his all in managing the village. I heard faint sounds coming from the path and knew immediately that Liu Qi and the others had returned. I told an ecstatic Miao Ming that Wei Shi had returned as well, and led him toward the village to meet the village chief. Ji Xing'an's youngest son pointed eagerly at the giant mushrooms and Tia Shan, shouting, "Look at that big guy. He looks so dazed, but he's super strong." The newly arrived craftsmen stared wide-eyed, captivated by the racks of fish filling the village. The craftsmen exchanged knowing, relieved glances as they realized they had finally found the right place. Even a few fish scraps beat their usual meager meals by a mile. Wei Shi and his companions halted their steps as I walked down the path toward them. Liu Qi and the Straw Hat villagers respectfully cupped their hands in salute, greeting me as young Master Bai. I looked over the blacksmiths and asked, "Which of you knows how to make crossbows?" Almost all of them raised their hands at once, shouting, "I do." They volunteered frantically, terrified that being left out would mean getting cast out of this bountiful place. I asked with mild surprise, "Then, can you make armor?" Everyone nodded eagerly again. I wondered why the imperial court treated such skilled technical talents so poorly, leaving them malnourished. Iron armor was a complete waste of metal, but crossbows were a different story altogether. One nervous villager stammered, "Wait, are we rebelling against the court?" A Liu village local immediately smacked the back of his head and shouted that the emperor was the one rebelling against me. I pressed my hand down to instantly silence the cheering crowd. Liu Qi then stepped forward to recount the dangerous events that had transpired in the county city. I assigned Wei Shi and Liu Da to manage the selection process for weapon and crossbow training. The arriving craftsmen quickly sorted themselves into neat groups according to their trades. I confirmed a total of 6 craftsmen standing before me, 2 stonemasons and 4 blacksmiths. I decided to assign the 4 blacksmiths as 3 fletchers and 1 weaponsmith. I wrapped up the briefing and told everyone we would sort out the specific job roles tomorrow. I needed to break down the iron items into ingots first to craft the profession blocks. I told Ji Xing'an that Tia Shan would deliver the miraculous healing water bucket shortly. I instructed Miao Ming to coordinate village administration matters with the village chief. I headed out to break tall grass in the fields to gather wheat seeds for breeding the chicks. As soon as I left, the villagers swarmed Wei Shi and Liu Da in a chaotic bidding frenzy. I sheared a grown sheep, crafted a bed from the wool, and placed it inside my inner room. I collapsed flat onto the bed and muttered, "So troublesome."